Got it.
Okay,
What's your
thanks.
camera? Got it?
Yep. Thanks, Chip. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chip. I appreciate it. And thanks for putting this 33rd seminar on in a row. That's great. So as Chip said, I'm Mike Foley. I'm the currently the sustainability director for the county, but from 1996 to 2006, roughly, I worked for Cleveland Tenants Organization, CTO, and was the director for about 1999 to 2006 or so. Chip wanted me to just kind of walk through kind of some of the stuff we did at CTO and why it was a kind of a really valuable organization in the county. And that, as Chip said, there's 60% of Clevelanders are living in rental housing. In the county, it was a third, little bit more than that in a lot of cities. Lakewood has a majority tenant population. At least it did when we were organizing there. But CTO was this great organization that was founded in the mid 1970s. As Chip said, it kind of died out in 2018. But it did a lot of really good work working with folks who were mostly low income, who were kind of subject to their living conditions being kind of at the whim of a landlord who was either good, mediocre, or bad, and who a lot of times didn't have kind of the power, kind of abilities that they had to create better kind of living conditions for themselves. So the organization tried to kind of help with kind of balancing the equations there. We ran kind of a hotline for tenants. So Ohio has a pretty good landlord-tenant law in the state, and it's been around since the 1970s. And it really does a decent job of kind of balancing the equations between landlords and tenants' rights. So but most tenants don't go to law school. They don't study what the Ohio Revised Code says. And so having an organization like Cleveland Tenants Organization that ran a hotline to say, hey, here's what happens when your landlord doesn't fix your windows, or when the heat goes out, or when railings busted. Having an organization that can answer those questions on a daily basis was important to a lot of folks in the community. And so we would get it at CTO about 10,000 phone calls a year from just regular folks who lived in rental housing, who had problems with their landlords or problems in their apartment. Sometimes we would get calls from landlords, by the way. So, hey, I don't know what to do. I've got a tenant who's not doing the right thing. They're creating hazards for other tenants, or they're destroying my property. How do I evict? So we would explain to landlords, here's the proper way, the legal way to work through the court system. But the majority of our calls came from tenants who had kind of issues with their landlords. The other stuff we did, though, was, which I think was equally important. So we did individual responses to tenants, individual complaints, but we also did a lot of organizing, and we did a lot of policy work. So the tenants organization, we had paid organizers on staff who would go out and work in public housing projects, who would work in mobile home parks, who would work in privately owned apartment complexes, and where there were kind of common concerns of tenants, we would help organize tenants organizations and use the state law, the landlord-tenant law, to do rent strikes, to put pressure on landlords to fix elevators, to put pressure on landlords to make sure water pressure was correct. We had a very successful kind of organizing effort at CTO that really had some trained organizers who would go knock on doors, get tenant meetings, allow tenants to kind of be the leadership in pushing for condition repairs or policy changes. And to be honest, some of those organizations are still around. When we did the largest rent strike in the state's history at the Columbia Park mobile home park in Olmsted Township, and back in early 2000s, 2002. That tenants organization or residents organization is still alive and well and kicking. and doing good stuff out there with they've had a series of new owners coming in, and they kind of put them on the spot saying, here, here's what we are here. You need to address us as a collective body. So we thought that's very important. Policy work. So the organization would kind of look at common issues that would come in front of it. So we worked on creating a Cleveland landlord-tenant law. We knew that there were issues with eviction laws, eviction issues. So there was 10,000 people being evicted in Cleveland Housing Court every year. So we put together a program and a policy, and I see Randy Cunningham is on the meeting, and Randy every day would go down to the Cleveland Housing Court, pull the eviction list, and we would start making phone calls to tenants saying, hey, here's what happens in eviction court. By the way, here's some potential resources if you don't have money to pay your rent. So the organization really did a good job of kind of thinking through both kind of practical single issue issues that the tenants had with their private landlords, thinking through policy issues that groups of tenants had on kind of major issues throughout the community, and then also organizing tenants when they had large landlords who were working together, and helping people who were being evicted. We had a staff when I was there of about 10. We had a couple of Vista volunteers, AmeriCorps Vistas. I think, Chip, you probably got some now too. We had students from Case Western Reserve and Cleveland State who were social work students who were coming in. So we'd have we had a decent staff, and consistently throughout those 10 years I was there, they just kind of worked on all the things I talked about up front, but did organizing. The nice thing about bringing students in is they are, kind of energetic, and they had new ideas they would talk to us about or push us on. So it was kind of a good culture, I think, we had at the organization of kind of old hands like Randy, and he's hopefully laughing that he's not so old anymore, but he's not so old. But Cheryl Boyer, Scott Wells, Mike Pepsini, and then we would have always a series of kind of new folks coming in. We also had a really good board. We had a 21-person board, and I think, Chip, you talked about some of the folks, but like Gail Long was on there, and Phyllis Cleveland was our board president, Cleo Busby. Great folks who kind of really were passionate about tenants' rights. Cleo, one of the things we organized, we had a number of HUD subsidized buildings in the community, and we organized good tenant councils in all those buildings. Cleo, we joined a group called the National Alliance of HUD Tenants, and Cleo actually became the national president of the National Alliance of HUD Tenants at one point. And so we would meet, Cleo would meet with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development on a regular basis, talking about tenant issues with who lived in HUD subsidized housing. Our funding was always a struggle. Somehow we I had, like most nonprofits, it's sleepless nights all the time trying to figure out how we're going to make payroll. But somehow we figured it out. A lot of it was help from local government. So we had block grant money from Cleveland City Council people who helped support the organization. The City of Cleveland, the county helped, the City of Lakewood helped. We were able to get money from the foundations, obviously. So Cleveland Foundation, United Way, Gun Foundation, all would chip in on a fairly regular basis to kind of keep our budget alive and running. I think when I left, our total budget was around $350,000, $400,000 for a staff of 8 paid staff, basically in the mid 2000s. I'm going to throw this, just if I can get access. I just want to share a couple of slides. So I think there's issues with obviously conditions and economics and kind of power dynamics between landlords and tenants. I think there's just going to be growing issues. We've been a city and a region that has seen flight out of the Midwest and out of Cleveland. I think we're going to see a little bit of a kind of a boomerang effect in the county, and that'll have effect on the rental housing market, I think, and on tenant rights. So if I can throw these slides up real quick.
You can.
I am, I would be remiss if I didn't do this, because I'm the I'm the director of sustainability, so for the county, and so I need to throw some of this stuff in for to take credit for my work, but my job. But some of the things we know is going to happen in Cuyahoga County and in the Midwest is climate change is happening. There is, there could be potential different issues for tenants in the future. So this is just a slide looking at temperature, annual average temperature over the last 100 years as compared to the last 10 years. And we're seeing a 2-degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature, right, across the board. So we're going to be a warmer climate in the future, meaning there's going to be a need for potential more air conditioning or more trees in denser urban areas, more denser development, to be honest. This is just a slide that kind of shows that this is the Arbor Day Foundation puts out a growing season map. In 1990s, we were in zone 5. Now we're in zone 6. So you can see our climate has shifted, and become a warmer place. We're also going to be a wetter place. So this is the average annual precipitation. We're seeing about a 5.5 inch increase in precipitation over the last 100 years versus the last 10. So it can be more wetness, more dampness, more potential flooding in the region. And we're also going to see stronger storms in the future. So this is the 100-year average versus the last 10-year average. 6 storms where you've got more than 1 inch precipitation over the 100-year average versus now it's about 8 storms a year. So, and that's just going to keep increasing. And this is just a slide I like to show. It has nothing much to do with kind of tenants' rights or tenants organizing, but just another show that, slide that just shows that we're going to see, we've seen a whole bunch of decrease in ice coverage since 1973 in the Great Lakes. So there's going to be this kind of, just another way to show we're seeing a warmer lake, warmer region. We've seen a 69% loss in Great Lakes ice coverage over the last 45 years or so. Which means there's going to be more evaporation with more precipitation, but more precipitation, more evaporation, and kind of a lake that goes up and down more frequently. So those are just other, I know we're talking about there's a whole bunch of issues with not having an organization in town who can really sit down and talk to tenants about their individual rights, dealing with their landlords. I think there's going to be some policy implications with climate change in the future, and I think what it will happen is a boomerang effect coming back in the Midwest. I think that the rental market may get more pricier. There may be more people coming back in, more competition for housing, you've talked about more landlords trying to, more people trying to buy bulk housing in the region. I don't see that as going away. I think we're going to be a more normal place. Well, climate change is going to affect us. We're going to be more normal than places on the coast or in the south or in the Far East that are going to see a lot more severe implications because of climate change. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Josiah.
So one question is that at the end of Cleveland Tenants Organization, there was a move by legal aid to take over the right to representation. And you must have worked with legal aid when you were at CTO. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has been a good thing or not measured or
look, I should say I love legal aid, and I see Catherine Donnelly's on here, and I know I talked to her last week because she's working with a bunch of tenants in Lawrenceville Heights right now. And I think they've done a yeoman's job in trying to react to the loss of Cleveland Tenants Organization. But I think there really needs to be an organization whose job is focused on tenants' rights and tenant organizing, and having legal aid as a resource to assist. When we were there, legal aid was this wonderful resource to us. They would help us with kind of both the legal analysis of issues. Peter Iskin, was the father of landlord-tenant law in the state of Ohio. He was on our board and would meet consistently with us on hey, we got this funny problem over here. What do you think? What's the legal analysis on it? So he would sit down and talk to us about that. But I think that's I think that should be the role of legal aid, is kind of be that support agency for a specific and explicit tenants' rights organization. And to the extent that we can figure out how to recreate a thing like CTO2, I think that would be important for the community.
Are there any other questions anybody has for Mike before we go on to our next speaker? Okay. Josiah from Niak, are you there?
I am indeed.
There you are. So this guy is a soccer player, so he's got to be excited.
Yeah, it
Watching
is quite the
soccer.
time.
It's a good time, but a community organizer in your heart, right? And working with
Absolutely.
low-income people. So maybe tell us a little bit about what NEOC's doing with low-income people and organizing tenants.
Absolutely. And I think Mike kind of teed me up here. I came on to NEOC about a year ago. And the concept was that we wanted to push the efforts. For those who don't know, NEOC is a Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless. And we wanted to push our efforts upstream to address some of the root causes, in addition to obviously, systemic racism and economic inequality and all these other things, but specifically around housing, because that's kind of what defines someone their experience of homelessness, is the fact that they do not have consistent housing. Right. So housing justice, we hired myself. I was hired, as well as my coworker and colleague, Barry, about a year ago. I'm no longer in that position. We had a few losses within the organization for good reason. They're pursuing further education and different things that they're interested in. So I'm in a advocacy and organizing role generally, which is a little more broad. But as a part of that, as Tony Bracatelli mentioned in the chat, we partnered with United Way and legal aid for the Cleveland Right to Counsel program. So we have been doing hyper-localized canvassing, specifically around right to counsel. So going out, knocking on doors, we get the full list of the housing court docket each week. We have 3 areas that we've been targeting that had a high level of eviction rate and a low level of attendance at housing court hearings. So those were determined by United Way or whoever their consultant was, maybe in conjunction with legal aid. I don't know. That happened before I got to it. But we take that list and we target those areas, knock as many doors as we can. And within that process, we let them know about legal aid and the Right to Counsel program, find out if they qualify directly. Right now, the qualifications include being at 100% of the poverty line or less, as well as having someone under 18 in the home. So, that's everyone does not qualify. It is. Go ahead.
No, I didn't realize that. I thought everyone. Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah. So it's a real challenge. I remember not too long ago, after pay to stay, which I'll talk about in a second, was passed, the mayor himself, as well as Sally Martin, came out on a canvas to kind of see how the work was done. And the first house we stopped at was serious conditions issues that were visible from the outside, as well as serious conditions issues on the inside as well. I was occupied by a woman with 4 kids upstairs and an elderly couple downstairs, both who had strokes in the past year. And the upstairs tenant qualifies for right to counsel. The downstairs tenants do not. So obviously, we're confronted with a lot of situations where we try to give hints at things that could be helpful in the process without trying to give legal advice for folks who do not qualify for right to counsel. We still encourage them to call legal aid, but we also understand that it's limited what that can be done if they don't actually qualify for right to counsel from a capacity standpoint. So there's definitely room to grow this program. It has been helpful. The canvassing itself has been helpful. We've seen a large uptick in the volume of people who attend their hearings, and then just period, because we really stress that even if you don't have a lawyer, just show up. If you don't show up, you lose. And we've seen, with that, an uptick in people who had better outcomes, whether that be judgments in their favor or a mediation process that at least did not have to force them out within a matter of weeks and have an eviction judgment on their record. So it's been a very enlightening experience, and I think the program is really good program that should grow. And so I look forward to finding more investment so that we can grow our capacity to do this work in conjunction with legal aid. And we've worked with not only with the Right to Counsel program, but as well doing a lot of the things that CTO previously had done. Obviously, we don't have a staff of 8 concentrating on this. It's just 2 people. So the capacity to do the building out of tenant organizations within a variety of buildings across the city is somewhat limited. But we have been trying to support existing ones, for one thing, that may be struggling with relationships with property managers or having conditions issues, a lot of times change of ownership. And that has been, we've had some successes there as well. And we really look at it not strictly within kind of a legalism perspective, but a general like community building and power building perspective, so that tenants feel empowered to actually make changes within their own lives for each other. That's kind of the perspective that we come at it with. And a great example of that is a new tenant union that we actually helped stand up through a lot of canvassing over at the Euclid Beach Mobile Home Park, which was recently purchased by the Land Conservatory. And, originally it seemed like, this is just going to be a big park, and folks wanted to stay, but didn't think that they had any power to do anything about it. And after a while, there was a realization that if we come together, maybe we can shift this conversation. So that's been a really powerful example of what tenant organizing can do. And now they have regular meetings on their own, write statements as a group that can be delivered if there's an issue or there's an ask. Set up meetings. They have like a structure, a liaison with legal aid. Legal aid has been very helpful in all of our endeavors. But I recognize what Mike stated, that, legal aid are not organizers. They can't do that work. So we do need to do that work, right? And they are a resource, as well as the Fair Housing Center have collaborated with them, as well as doing like warm handoffs if we run into a situation while we're doing canvassing, or we get a call and we feel like it's applicable, if there are some reasonable accommodations that need to be applied for, or there has been some kind of discrimination, we can pass that along. And that has happened several times, and they've been really, really helpful. So the collaborative efforts of folks have been inspiring, honestly. I guess the other thing was legislatively pay to stay passed, which was a real boon, especially when emergency rental assistance they were only working in tandem for a very brief moment, a couple months, but we really saw the power of that. And what pay to stay basically is, in the state of Ohio, if you were, $1 short or 1 day late, your landlord could evict you. And if you found that dollar 2 days later, they could not be compelled to accept that dollar, and the eviction could go through. That is no longer the case. If you have tender all the way up until the time of your hearing, that tender must be accepted, right? And so that has helped a lot of people stay in their homes, not be displaced, kept families together, and hopefully over the long haul will help stabilize some communities. There's a lot of challenges right now that we've seen throughout some of the market dynamics that have been created in rental markets and that have been discussed today. A lot of property managers or ownership has changed hands a lot of times. Sometimes people have been living in a place for over a year with no contact from anyone, and then they get served an eviction, and they're like, "Where did this even come from?" So there are a lot of challenges that we need to address on the front end. But I've seen, it seems that the city is very engaged, and Sally Martin has been engaged to create what we need to do on the front end, as well as accountability on the back end to help rectify some of these situations. And I saw, Charles, it looked like you want to hop in there.
No, I just had a question about the county. So there's a lot of rental property outside of Cleveland. And I noticed, I can't remember who it was, but somebody came up with some money, maybe it was Bootish, to do right to counsel in Cuyahoga County. Has that been successful? Have you had any organizing work in Euclid or Lakewood or the Heights or Shaker Heights or any of the suburbs with lots of apartments?
So we haven't been like really actively engaged from an on the ground level, just due to capacity. We have attended and pushed for pay to stay legislation at various municipalities with some success. Cleveland Heights, I know, passed pay to stay. I want to say
South Euclid.
South Euclid has passed pay to stay. There is a temporary legislation that is being discussed in Warrensville. Obviously, we're pushing for a permanent resolution there. And you know, to the mention of those apartments out there, the Granada apartments, I actually am planning to head out there because that is a really big apartment complex. Plus, my wife used to live there. So I'm familiar with it. So it's kind of got a little special part in my heart. So I will be doing that. As far as the county more broadly, I do know that the access, I don't think the same restrictions apply for the county level, if my understanding is correct. I don't think the same restrictions apply at the county level. So that is good. That allows people more access. There has just not been the capacity to do the kind of outreach to really disseminate that information to folks outside of the city of Cleveland, where there's where we actually are kind of like contracted to do that hyper localized canvassing and engagement.
Let's see, are there anybody else have any questions in the chat? Let's see.
Well, Josiah, and I don't know if I'm should put this in the chat or not. Maybe I will, but to kind of draw the link from our panel presentation here to what you're talking about here, the concept of community investing, community ownership of property. Do you think that there's any room with your activities and the activities of associated organizing efforts to really take that under consideration as a potential strategy to both not only deter bad actors as our panel outlined, but then also to encourage not only participation, but shared growth and equity in particularly historically underserved and undeveloped or underdeveloped areas of the city where the need is greatest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's really important. There's a lot of buildings that just need to get torn down. We know that there's a huge backlog of those buildings, but I think what's really key at this time is to identify and invest in those buildings that are salvageable, that can still be repaired, that are still useful, and really leverage the extreme need within the community for that housing stock. And if we can do that through cooperative ownership, I think that's a really powerful dynamic to create where that housing can remain affordable for perpetuity. And it also builds community investment within that community itself. So it's not like we invest in this community with some dollars and that's that, but actually have residents who are kind of permanently invested. And I think that is a tool that we should really look at, and in conjunction with something like enhanced curbside inspection and a tool of receivership. I think between the three of those, I think we can really do a lot of good work to kind of pull away from some of these, whether they're intentional or unintentional bad actors, right? Because it really, from our perspective, it really doesn't matter. Like, I'm not necessarily trying to judge each individual or track each individual down and say bad boy. Like, that's really not my concern. My concern is about the residents within the community. And so if these properties can be kind of wrestled away and the community itself can kind of take control over that going forward, I think that's a really powerful tool. And there are organizations that specifically do this work that could speak more intelligently than myself, but I do believe that that is a really powerful tool to kind of disrupt some of the problematic trends that we've been seeing.
Anybody else have any questions for Josiah? Frank, did you have a question or just a comment?
It looks like those are questions.
I put 2 questions in the chat. It's not necessarily for Josiah, it's maybe for anybody. And I know we still haven't heard from the third panelist, but it seems to me that with the documented increase in investor purchases of rental homes and the impact of COVID over the last several years, the need for a CTO-like function is probably greater than at any time in the past. And I propose 2 questions. One, to bring that function back properly, how much funding is going to be needed? And I just tossed out the number of $500,000 a year. And then second question is, if that funding could be raised, should that go to a new dedicated standalone tenants organization, essentially bring back CTO or something like it, or should it be an add-on to NEOC or somebody else? I think somebody ought to fund it. I think Cleveland Foundation, Gunn Foundation, St. Luke's, United Way, 500,000 is not that much. If you think about each of them putting in 100,000, City of Cleveland and the county each putting in 100,000, you could easily do that. And it wouldn't really be more than a hiccup for some of them to do that. So anyway, that's for anybody. It's for Josiah, it's for...
I can take a swing at that one. We've been working, Mary Boyle and a group of us with NEOC and other players to kind of resurrect and talk to the past players and at CTO and trying to find out what happened at the end of the day and what we could do to resurrect Cleveland Tenants Organization. We've been trying to get a group of folks together over in Shaker Boulevard to do some tenant organizing. And it just, there are things that lawyers can do that are effective and can be in court. And there are things that community organizers can do that are more effective and complement the legal work. And for example, they are putting, $12 million into Shaker Square. They're paving all the streets, all this stuff. But all around it is this collapse of these apartments. It's amazing to me that, these things go on and nobody really takes responsibility for it. It's just a struggle. And people don't have heat. There's mold in these buildings anyhow. Our next speaker is going to speak to that, who's a tenant in one of these buildings, Ron James, with Mary Boyle, and maybe Mary can add some things. Are there any other questions that people have?
I'm not sure that was an answer to my question.
Yeah.
Well, you're right. I think it could be added on to NEOC, or it could be a new standalone. One of the things we did find in our research was that when CTO went under in 18, they dissolved their C3. So we'd have to start over with a new C3.
Yeah. So Chip, this is Mike. So I think 500,000 is probably a good number. executive director, some staff organizers, some, you're going to need some technology, you're going to need some office space.
Yeah.
You're going to, I don't know if phone lines are the right thing to do anymore, or if you're answering text. I don't know that stuff anymore, but that seems like a good number. And in terms of kind of add on to NEARC or CTO, the nice thing is when I was at CTO, NEAC, our headquarters were right next door to NEAC's on over at the Perkins building. And every day we would just, we'd see Brian Davis and Angelo, and other folks from NEAC. And we would just, trade stories back and forth and, commiserate or celebrate victories. It was nice having kind of two organizations that, were symbiotic in some respects. NEAC was trying to keep people out of homelessness and keep them as tenants. We were trying to keep tenants as tenants and not into homelessness, but having the kind of the separate, focuses was kind of a nice, kind of dynamics, I thought. And Josiah, I don't know Chip's right. There is this practical thing of there's no 501c3 status left for CTO anymore, so you'd have to recreate something. Josiah, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, we've, when I came into this position, one of the first thing I did was try to talk to folks.
Just fine. How are you? Oh, thank you.
Bill, mute yourself.
Okay, I think we're good. One of the first things I did was try to talk to some folks who had experience with CTO and kind of get that perspective and that history. I think there has been a lot of change in, obviously technology, like the landscape of Cleveland. Different organizations exist that didn't exist then. Other organizations don't exist anymore that did exist then. I would be open to figuring out what really works the best, and being able to bring, I think, a lot of the new energy and new ideas from different people. That's my only concern, is to make sure that we are not looking at this just from a nostalgic perspective, like we just want this thing that we had one time. That we really look at it like, what can we do right now that can really fit the need. And I think that could look a lot of different ways, but I think there is a real need for coordination and investment to build capacity in organizing and addressing some of these issues.
Can I jump in here? One thing that I think that any new entity that would be created, I think they should have also kind of like a missionary role as far as trying to help seed and encourage the creation of tenant unions in all the major cities of Ohio and a lot of the more outlying areas. One of the heartbreaks you have when you were in CTO was like, I once got a call from somebody from Scioto County. And these people out in the rural areas and the exurbs and everything were just lost. I mean, they were totally lost. And breaking all of my rules, I helped them out. Now that I'm retired, nobody can put a thumb on me for that. So anyhow, but you got to go and because think of it this way: tenant unions exist in a hostile state, and the more tenant unions you've got, the more ability to push back against forces in the state house. And as far as they're concerned, tenants don't deserve any rights. And they're that much of a bunch of Neanderthals. So I think that I know that there was some discussion in CTO about going more on a statewide level. And that was a bridge too far as the board was concerned. But I think that's very essential and to write it into the founding of any new organization. You got to have a missionary purpose.
Also, Randy, what was the name of your book in case people want to pick it up?
Oh, It's democratizing Cleveland, the rise and fall of community organizing in Cleveland, Ohio, 1975 to 1985. And there are people on this call that helped me do editing and made sure I didn't get too far out into the realm of fiction. And that was Frank Ford especially. And just to plug me, I'm going to have another book coming out next year. So,
Thanks, Randy.
okay.
Terrific organizer you were. Okay, so let's go on to Ron James and Mary Boyle. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. This is Ronald James.
Hey, Ron, how are you? You got to put
I'm
your.
doing all right today.
So, Ron, let me introduce you. You're a former county prosecutor. And you're a
Assistant
tenant-
county prosecutor.
Assistant county prosecutor. Everyone's an assistant. I forgot that. And you live at 12701 Shaker Boulevard, right?
That is correct.
And you were there with Mary Boyle, former county commissioner, who's part of the CTO2 group. But you were a tenant in a building that has what we call lovingly condition issues. And maybe you can explain to our audience what the condition issues are and how you've been organizing around those issues. Take it away.
Okay, first I'll talk about the people that own our building at 12701 also own buildings, Shaker Boulevard at 12500 Shaker and 12600 Shaker. And their owners are out of New York City, and they're bad actors, and they have taken extraordinary lengths to not to be identified by anybody. Okay, there are like 4 different Shaker Square Apartments, LLCs, incorporated in 4 different states, and only one of those owns the 3 buildings on Shaker Boulevard. Our building had no heat during the winter of last year in 2021, 2022. None of the apartments had any heat. Today, most of the people have heat, but there are still people in our building that have not had heat or don't have heat at the current time. We have major problems with our boiler system. The pipes in the boiler system have rusted out and corroded. So we have steam coming into the walls of our building, which has resulted in quite a few apartment buildings having black mold. I had black mold in my apartment. I had to move out for a week before they finally decided that they would fix the problem. We have other tenants that still have black mold in their apartments. We had one lady who left because she got sick because of the black mold and left. What these people intend to do is to come in. They bought the building in January of this year. They want to make cosmetic changes. They want to increase the occupancy rate and jack up the rents so that they can sell the buildings at a profit, because they bought them very cheaply, and have somebody else, the new buyer, come in and make the major repairs that are needed. It has been extremely difficult to deal with these people. They had a management company that came in with them, and they have been terminated. So we have a new company that's supposed to be coming in, but we do not know at this time who they are. We had a property manager who had left, and the leasing manager is now the property manager. We had 3 maintenance people in each one of the buildings, but 2 of them were let go. So we only have 1 maintenance person for 3 buildings. You know, if there's a problem in the building, there's nobody there at the present time that can solve the problem. We just got packages that have been in the office, their office on 12701, that from FedEx and UPS that have been in there for 4 or 5 weeks, and people didn't even know it. We've had increase in thefts and vandalism because we don't have any kind of security. Our door was broken most of last year. They just fixed it a couple of months ago, but it's broken again. So we don't have any security in our building. I was asked in April by the Morelands group that Chip is involved in, and I've had some help from Mary Boyle, Jay Westbrook, and Meg Weingarten to start a tenants organization to try to resolve some of these problems. We have not been totally successful, only partially. With Tony Dial and Regina Burton, we're trying to organize the tenants. You know, we have no trouble in people letting us take the lead in organizing, but the problem is most of the tenants feel that they don't have any power to change anything. And they believe that we don't have any power to change anything. So we've had a lot of tenant apathy. We've had meetings every month since June. We brought in speakers from Legal Aid and the city of Cleveland. We have a meeting today. Today, this evening at 6 p.m., where Mary Barnwell from the Housing Court is going to come in from the second time. We're trying to get people to sign the form, 30-day notice forms, to take down the housing court so that we can get put the rents in escrow. We tried it once before. We got very little response. I think the tenants are getting angrier now. So I think we'll get a better response. We've been trying to act as a mediator between the tenants and the landlords about solving problems in each individual apartment. We've had some success at that. We have gotten the confidence of more of the residents, so they're more willing to do what we've asked them to do. But our main problem is most of the people just sit back and want us to solve all their problems, and we can't do that. We need everybody in the building to be organized so that we have some clout with the owners, we have some clout with the city. The city has helped us. We had a major inspection of our building just a couple of days ago. This is about the third time they've been out, but we had 4 inspectors come. They did a thorough job of inspection, and they're going to write it up. The owners have a date in housing court on Monday. They didn't come for the last hearing. That was continued for 3 weeks. I don't believe they're going to come to this one because they don't want to be held responsible for what they're doing. We need a tenants organization real bad so that we can organize everybody in this neighborhood so that we can put pressure on the city council, the county, and state government. That's it.
Very eloquent, very eloquent. So are there questions? Let's look in the chat here, see what we got going here. The greatest change in Cleveland has been the explosion of upscale apartment buildings and the gentrification. Why now? What is behind the boom? Who are the heavy dancers in this development? There needs to be some research done because it has stumped everyone. I've talked to Randy Cunningham.
I'd like to answer part of that question.
Okay.
I believe that these people have increased the rents just this month. And I believe they're probably going to increase the rents again. So if they sell the building for the profit, somebody comes in and they're going to have to increase the rents a third or fourth time just to cover the major repairs that need to be done in this building. And what's going to happen is most of the people who live there, most of the people are either retired or they work at, medium level jobs. They're not going to be able to afford the high rents in this building. So what's going to end up is that most of them are going to have to leave in a couple of years because they can't afford to live in the building. And it's really nice. It's convenient. It's close to the Rapid. It's close to a grocery store, drugstore. You got the Rapid right there. So it's convenient. Most of the people are in the building because it is convenient. But these people we are not going to be able to live there and maybe pay $1,400 or $1,500 a month rent instead of like the $900 we're paying now.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ron or Mary? Mary, do you want any thoughts about CTO 2?
She said no.
She had said no. Okay, all right.
She shook her head.
I think Josiah had something.
Josiah, you got something?
Yeah, I just wanted to real quickly respond to the question about the high-end development. And I think the largest driver for that over the past 15, 20 years has been tax abatement policy, and how the funding stream for developers is constructed to get federal money. And so one, you get the tax breaks for 15 years. You don't have to pay taxes. If it's a condo, your condo residents don't have to pay taxes. So it's a subsidy that creates kind of a false entry level into that high end market, which then the investment of, it's not a zero sum game, but you can't invest as much as they're investing in that market and still do investment in other ways. And the second part to that is also the definition of what affordable housing is and how AMI is determined. When you're investing, developing in an area, the AMI is taken from a swath of land that you're gonna be incorporating Brattonall, you're gonna be incorporating Hunting Valley, you're gonna be incorporating all these places where the median income is way higher than the particular neighborhood that the development is taking place. So you can say it's an affordable housing project, and it's just flatly not. So I think those are the two largest factors in development that is inaccessible to most Cleveland residents.
And anybody else has a question or in the chat?
I heard there was a question from the chat room is who are the owners of the buildings? And we believe it is AMG Management and the Chetrick family out of New York City. Okay.
He lives on some fancy street and stuff, and
Right.
Let me ask you about the concept of press. You've had a lot of press out there, Ron. Do you think that's been helpful? Joe Pakanakis and whatever Channel 5, has that been helpful?
Joe Pakanakis has been out there twice. He was out there last week for the second time. I've gotten some feedback from people that have seen it, but it comes, you get the interest, and then it dies down. What we really need is somebody like the plain dealer to write a series of articles about what's going on, like they're doing with the lead paint issue. And we need to keep it in front of the people for an extended period of time so that the depth of this problem sinks in. That's my answer.
Okay. Any final, Mike, you got any comments, or Josiah, anybody? Final comments, Ron? We can wrap this up.
Just a gold star to Lisa Gold Scott, who remembered our phone number from 15 years ago, 216-432-0617. So good job, Lisa.
Remembering things that went on in the past. Here's Phil.
One more thing. Jay Westbrook has a flyer with more information about the owners of the building. So if you want to know a little more about them, contact Jay Westbrook.
Okay. Is that it on that? So any final questions or thoughts? We're going to keep working on trying to get a CTO 2 off the ground, whether it's through NEOC or whatever it is, but there is clearly a terrific hole in the housing issues and community on this topic. And we'll keep working on it and stay focused as much as we can. So I guess we're on to our next topic, which is statewide politics. Maybe we should leave Mary Boyle there too, but she has resigned from her position. So I guess our next speaker is Dennis Keating. Dennis, are you ready to go, or do you want to take a break before we get started?
Chip, I think we're supposed to start at noon after a slight break.
Well, we'll take a slight break here.
So
Okay.
let's wait till 12 o'clock and I'll have my panel ready.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll take a break here. Everybody take a break, go do whatever you want to, get a sandwich, and we'll be right back. Thanks so much. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Nasha, are you there?
Hello,
Hi, Joe.
how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. I'm going to step over and look at something for my videographer real quick before we start. We've got a couple minutes here, so I'll be right back, okay?
Good. I'm going to introduce all three of you in advance before you start talking.
Okay. Okay, hang on 1 second here. Okay, Dan. I gotta hurry.
Got two more panelists to go, Chip.
You can just keep that whole thing. Is that too long? Okay. Okay, I'm going to jump on this and then I'll come deal with that, okay? Okay, sorry, Dennis, I'm back.
No problem.
Okay,
We'll start in a couple minutes. We've got two more people coming on here.
okay.
Hi, Tom. Welcome.
Hey Dennis, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, absolutely.
We'll start just in a couple minutes here, waiting for our third panelist.
Okay.
A bumpy beginning. So we're waiting for Sarah, right?
Yeah, I'll start with the introductions and then hopefully she'll log on momentarily.
Okay.
So first of all, I'm Dennis Keating, not my wife, Kay Martin, and I'm the moderator for this panel. And the idea was that with a couple of weeks to digest the results of the midterm elections, we thought it would be interesting and appropriate to bring in a couple of experts to talk about the impact of those elections at the national level, at the level of the state of Ohio, and then in particular in Ohio, our region of Northeast Ohio. The panel is not quite the same as it was originally advertised, but we were fortunate in getting replacements for two people who could not attend and participate, but from the same organizations. So I'm going to introduce them now. Hopefully our third and lead speaker will log on momentarily. And that would be Sarah Sadian. She's a senior vice president for public policy and field organizing with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is one of the leading national organizations advocating for affordable housing and fair lending. And we expect her to lead off and probably talk in particular about housing issues, but not necessarily only those. She'll be followed by Joe Inglis, and she is with the Ohio State House News Bureau and is spoken on many network shows and represents NPR. She's also currently the president of the Ohio Radio and TV Correspondents Association. And we asked Joe on very short notice to provide us with an overview of what happened and the implications for Ohio politics. That might be the General Assembly, some of the congressional races. We had also a highly publicized race for the vacant seat in the US Senate, and perhaps some local issues as well. Our third speaker is Professor Tom Sutton from Baldwin Wallace University. Tom is a commentator on politics with one of our local TV stations. He also, in addition to being a professional political science professor at the university, director of their Community Research Institute. So I don't see, is Sarah, are you here?
Let me look, Dennis.
Not yet. Okay, well, why don't we start then with Joe on the politics of Ohio. I'll ask each of them to speak for about 15 minutes or so. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end to pick up some questions in the chat for you. If you could direct them to any of the panelists, that would be helpful as well. So Joe Inglis from Ohio Public Radio, the State House News Bureau. Let's hear about Ohio.
Well, thank you for having me. Let me get adjusted here in my seat, trying to come in here where it's a little quieter. But thank you for having me. I think this election was interesting. The statewide turnout was just over 50%, and it was a very good night for Republicans when those results came in. Every statewide Republican office holder that was who was up for re-election won. Governor DeWine won re-election 63% to 37% over Democrat Nan Whaley. Whaley only won 3 of 88 counties: Franklin, Cuyahoga, and Athens. That carried down through all of the other statewide races, including Republicans taking over the control of the Ohio Supreme Court. And the US Senate race that you mentioned, it was a closer race. Republican J.D. Vance won by 6 points over Democrat Tim Ryan, but Ryan ran to attract voters who went to Donald Trump. He didn't have the same talking points as the other Democrats running for statewide office. Ryan won in the fundraising. I mean, he came up with a lot of money on his own to air ads, but a lot of outside money went to help J.D. Vance in the end run. And so that kind of put J.D. Vance in a position where he could win. Ryan won 8 counties, but lost his own, Trumbull County. Ryan's message of focusing on involving workers seemed to be more palatable to Ohioans than the issues that dominated the conversation statewide with other Democrats, abortion rights, for example. A lot of the Democrats talked about abortion rights. Ryan talked about that, but didn't make it his own talking point. You almost had to ask him about that. Democrats really have a problem in small towns and rural areas throughout Ohio when you look at the numbers and the outcome of this election. Former Ohio Democratic Party Chair David Pepper noticed that there are counties that Democrats were winning 15 years ago when former President Obama was on the ballot, but they're not winning those now. 8 counties carried by Tim Ryan versus 19 counties carried when President Obama was on the ballot. Ohio, the House and the Senate races, they also favored Republicans, but you've got to remember those are heavily gerrymandered districts. In fact, the Ohio Supreme Court had ruled maps unconstitutional several times, and they were never corrected. And so gerrymandered maps were used for this election. And there's really, now that the Republicans have another supermajority, and even more supermajority, actually, stronger supermajority, there's really no impetus for GOP lawmakers and leaders to follow the Ohio Supreme Court's ruling to fix the maps. And, now that they've got Republicans on the court, the makeup of the court has changed, they might not have to. By 2/3 of the vote, Ohio voters approved an issue that allows judges and courts to use public safety as a factor in setting bail. The Ohio Supreme Court had ruled judges could not consider that when setting bail. And also by a 2/3 vote, voters banned non-citizens from voting in local elections. The city of Yellow Springs had tried to allow non-citizens to vote in a very specific local issue. That didn't happen. And now the passage of this ensures it can't. But there's another part of that. 17-year-olds who have been able to vote in primaries, if they're going to be 18 by the general election, there's a thought that they might not be able to vote now because it has an 18-year-old voting statute. And so, there's some folks who say, okay, well, if you look at that, the 18-year-olds, you have to be 18-year-old to vote. So you can't vote in the primary if you're 17, but would be 18 in the general. And then locally here in Columbus, the voters, 2/3 of Columbus voters approved a $200 million bond package for affordable housing. Now, anyone who's been here knows the housing costs in Central Ohio have been rising in recent years, and especially those who rent have been priced out of the market. So the $1.5 billion bond package includes $80 million for affordable rental units, $50 million for affordable homeownership through the Community Land Trust, $40 million to preserve housing affordability in targeted neighborhoods, and $30 million for people who are dealing with homelessness. Columbus residents also passed some other local issues to improve health and safety in the community. It's part of an overall growth plan for when Intel and other businesses are coming in soon. Record early voting in this election, but only half of the registered voters voted statewide in the election. So the takeaway is Ohio is out of step with other states around us, like Michigan and Pennsylvania, where voters were split more between GOP and Democrats. One reason might be Ohio is older and whiter. And we also have a brain drain problem where young people get their degrees here and leave the state. We found out that the abortion issue wasn't as much of a sting here. There wasn't anything on the ballot about abortion. And the current ban was put on hold by a court a month before the election, stopping that steady stream of stories about children who were raped having to go to other states for abortions, or women with problem pregnancies being put in jeopardy because doctors are afraid to perform abortions. So the issue was a minor issue for many voters. And half of Ohioans who were registered didn't even vote. And the population needs to be more engaged. And if it was, it could change outcomes in the future. Republicans think they have a mandate. I don't know, do they? The GOP supermajority is now trying to do two things to protect themselves. Two places where Democrats still have state control, the State Board of Education and the ballot box. And at the State Board of Education, there's a bill here being considered in the lame duck that's trying to take away power from the state school boards where the Democrats were successful, 3 new Democrats on that nonpartisan board. And this bill would strip away some of the power that the board has over curriculum, school oversight, that sort of thing. And then the legislature is also doing another thing here. They're considering a bill to make it harder to pass constitutional amendments by requiring a 60% supermajority. And there's abortion, redistricting, legalizing marijuana, several different things that could be on the ballot. So if the legislature passes this and they are able to put the change in the process before voters in May of 2023, then some of these big issues that could come before voters could be required to have a 60% supermajority. So I'll kind of leave it at there. But if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Okay, let's put those in the chat. All I would ask you, could you remind us the congressional makeup from Ohio now, given we lost a seat?
We did get 5. There were 5 Democrats that took over congressional seats, and the rest were Republican. And so Ohio kind of, the Democrats kind of did better in the congressional area than they did in the other areas, but they're still outnumbered. And again, that's gerrymandering too. That's that play there.
Okay, thank you. Tom Sutton, could you tell us more about what happened in Northeast Ohio, congressional or local or both?
Dennis, the person from DC came on.
Oh, okay, great. So you need to unmute Tom.
If you'd like to go with
Why
the.
don't you go ahead and then we'll bring
Go
Sarah.
ahead. Okay, that's fine. Well, thanks for the invite and good to be with you all. In terms of Northeast Ohio, we didn't see that much change in terms of our state house delegations, in terms of representation. The change really was congressional. As Joe Engels indicated, we saw an increase actually in the number of Democrats in the congressional delegation from 4 to 5 statewide, even though losing a seat from 16 to 15. And for Northeast Ohio, we essentially have 2 Democrats, Amelia Sykes in the 13th district and Chantel Brown in the 11th district. And Sykes was certainly one of the big wins because that was a competitive district, but she was able to win. And then we have the 3 Republicans that represent parts of what we call Northeast Ohio. Max Miller, who will be a new Republican in the 7th district that was redrawn that captures some of the western part of our region. Rob Latta in the 5th district, who is an incumbent. He's been in Congress for many years. And then another longtime Republican incumbent who by Republican terms would be considered moderate, and that's Dave Joyce, representing the northeast part of Northeast Ohio. In the State House, we do have some good information in terms of leadership, and that is that the minority party in the Senate, the Democrats, of which there are 7 of the 33, the minority leader will be Nikki Antonio from Lakewood, and also Kent Smith won his Senate seat and will be part of that leadership as well. The key to all of that really, I think, is with all the incumbent Republicans statewide having been reelected, plus J.D. Vance winning the Senate seat, I think the key in terms of your issues and policy concerns related to affordable housing and the protection of and expansion of affordable housing in a rising market in terms of price is where is the DeWine administration and where is it going forward on these areas? There's a couple of things related to legislation and disbursements of funding by the DeWine administration that indicate that they do support this in some ways. And so if you can figure out where they're coming from and where they want to go, latching on to those kinds of policy initiatives from the DeWine administration, I think will help the region in terms of securing support for affordable housing. Number one, and this is certainly no surprise to those of you in the field, tax credits are what Republicans like as opposed to creating funding programs. And we certainly saw that with Governor DeWine offering low-income tax credits. It's an established program, but allocating funding to that for the development of low, moderate income housing. Another area which may not seem related at first, but DeWine has made this connection, and it has to do with this big focus on providing support for families, in particular low-income families, and especially for newborns. So he has zeroed in on the infant mortality rate and reducing that. He obviously he signed the heartbeat bill, so this does relate to his positions on the issue of abortion and quote pro-life. But part of that initiative that he has for reducing infant mortality includes the concept of stable housing. So if I were involved in nonprofit housing, affordable housing development and advocacy in Northeast Ohio, I'd be zeroing in on some of those social indicators that DeWine places at the top of his agenda to look at how can those be used as leverage to then get support for redeveloping housing on an affordable basis. I think the other part of it is workforce development and workforce in general. He has a big commitment to that. He has had some great projects land in his lap, like the Intel move to Ohio, the expansion of Honda, et cetera. But by the same token, many of those are companies and other entities and businesses that require workers who will not be paid at the same level as computer chip manufacturers. And for them, it's the issue of, okay, we have to avoid Ohio becoming another place where it's a metropolitan area with needs at lower levels of wages in terms of jobs. But then if the cost disparity of living starts to rise, then that squeezes people out of those jobs because they can't afford to live here. And it reinforces the problem of a market that has gaps. And we have those job gaps now. in Northeast Ohio, particularly in Cuyahoga County. We have huge gaps in the need for people in the areas of medicine and healthcare, manufacturing, technology, and even construction. And a part of what's driving that is that those line workers, those service workers, those folks that are at, say, $20, $25 an hour jobs, $15 an hour jobs, they can't afford, as you well know, to get rental housing, much less own a house. We're somewhat maybe affected by the impact of people moving to this region from other parts of the country that have much more severe housing disparity costs and also natural disaster problems. We have water. Sometimes we forget how valuable that is. We take it for granted, but other regions don't have it and they're coming here for it. But I think these are things to key in terms of opportunities from a policy perspective in looking at working with both our congressional delegation and working with our Northeast Ohio state delegation. Nikki Antonio has a great reputation for working across the aisle. The other part of this is that there will only be one real leadership change in the House majority, and that's the new speaker, Derek Marin. He's relatively new, younger member of the House. Really don't know much about him other than that he's from Xenia, Ohio. Allison Russo will continue to be the minority leader. And then and Matt Huffman will be the Senate majority leader. So the continuity could actually be to the advantage of people in the housing policy area in terms of building on what their priorities already are. This also, you are not involved in the culture wars kinds of things that get a lot of press and attention and controversy. Steering clear of that is always wise. And then finally, I would very much emphasize the fact that the US Senate being Democratic majority still means that Sherrod Brown will continue to serve as chair of the Banking and Finance Committee in the Senate. And that, again, I think has a huge potential, as it has already, for potential financial and housing programs at the federal level that then we have a direct connection to through Senator Brown. And keeping in mind, of course, that he will also be facing re-election in 2024. And Republicans would love nothing better than to see him toppled as the last remaining statewide non-judicial office holder in Ohio. So I'll stop there and see if there are questions.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Chip, did you say Sarah's on?
She's there, yeah.
I don't see her on my screen. Can you hear me, Sarah? Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
So-
hi, how are you?
We're lucky to have Sarah Sadian from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. She is a Director of Public Policy and Field Operations. She's previously been associated with other community development organizations, including, if I get my note here, there we are. She's previously been associated with, you should help me, Sarah.
Enterprise Community Partners.
Enterprise Community, right, yes.
And Raposa Associates, which was a small lobbying firm on affordable housing and community development. But it's very good to be with you guys today. I was going to share a little bit about what we see ahead in Congress due to the election. Of course, you all know that the Republicans won a slight majority in the House, just a few seats over the 218 that's required to have control. Democrats remain in control in the Senate, and that is with or without the runoff election in Georgia, which could give Democrats a little bit more breathing room if they win. A couple of things about what that means. I'm going to start with committee leadership and how that changes, and then to talk a little bit about what we expect to see next year in terms of legislation. So on the appropriations side of things, we see some positive changes with leadership on the committees. Both the chair and ranking member retire at the end of this year, and so there's new leadership. For Democrats, that means that Patty Murray is very likely to become the new chairwoman of the committee. She has a very strong background on housing and homelessness issues, and I see this as a really important step forward or positive development for us. Likewise, Susan Collins is likely to become the chair of the full committee for Republicans, the ranking member for Republicans. Again, she is probably the best we could have hoped for in that position. She was previously the highest ranking Republicans on the Transportation HUD subcommittee. So she comes from this background in housing. So that is also a really positive step forward as well. On the House side, full committee leadership stays the same. Of course, Republicans take control instead of Democrats. But at the subcommittee level, we're seeing some changes. It's possible that the existing Republican, Mario Diaz-Balart from Florida, who has been a really great advocate for housing, he may be term limited. And so a new Republican might take over. It's not clear who exactly that would be. And the Democrat, David Price, retired this year. And we've heard that maybe Quigley from Massachusetts might take over there. So all in all, I think the folks on committee look pretty good, but as I'll discuss later, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're in the clear when it comes to funding levels and budget levels and negotiations. Just a word about the authorizing committees. So this is the Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. There is new leadership in the Banking Committee. Tom mentioned earlier that Sherrod Brown's remaining as chair of the appropriations, of the Banking Committee, which is great. He's a great champion on housing issues, very aligned with the goals that we have. So it's, we are very grateful to see him remain in that role. There is going to be a new Republican on that committee. Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania retired at the end of this year, and Tim Scott is very likely to take his place. That's a very positive development. Pat Toomey was very opposed to housing resources. He did not think that HUD should exist. He was ideologically opposed to many bills, even things that had bills that had bipartisan support. Tim Scott, I think, is a pretty good option for the Banking Committee. He's much more moderate. We did a deep dive looking at the bills that he's either introduced or co-sponsored, and nearly all of them are ones that have bipartisan support, that look at making incremental reforms in a good positive direction. In general, I'd say his focus has not been on housing, but to the extent that he's weighed in, it's been in a very moderate bipartisan way. On the House side, things are going to be a little bit different. Maxine Waters is going to become the ranking member, not the chair, and Patrick McHenry will be elevated to chair of the committee for Republicans. This is going to be challenging for us. He's not very well aligned with Housers on these issues. I'll talk a little bit about what we see ahead, but we're generally expecting a focus on investigations into COVID relief funds, into the Biden administration in general. There's an open question about how productive that committee will be in terms of advancing housing laws. So one of the things that we're looking at to try to get a sense of what's to come is by looking at the policy documents that House Republicans have put out in advance of the election, sort of claiming what they would focus on if they were to take control. And so that gives us a sense of where they might want to go. So they put out a document called the Commitment to America, which outlines 5 major goals for House Republicans. 1, cutting spending, reducing regulations, ending welfare incentives, focusing on public safety, and holding Washington accountable. And they're not super clear about, like, it's not explicit where housing would fit in, but I think that tells us a little something about the threats that we see next year. First and foremost, I think the place where Republicans can do the most harm is around spending cuts to housing programs and other domestic programs. You may remember that in 2010, when Republicans won the midterm election, they were able to squeeze out 10 years of budget cuts through the Budget Control Act. And while Congress was able to reach limited agreements every 2 years to lift those caps to some extent, it really made it difficult for Congress to fund housing programs at anywhere near the level that was needed. I expect we're going to see an even greater effort by Republicans this time around to dramatically cut funding. And that's in part because the most conservative wing of the Republican Party is now the majority of their caucus. And they'll have an enormous amount of leverage to use when it comes to lifting the debt ceiling or just passing annual appropriations bills in exchange for deep spending cuts, whether it's to entitlement programs or to domestic programs. The other place that I think we'll see legislation from Republicans will likely be around Cutting housing benefits through things like work requirements, time limits, other sorts of rigid criteria that will be used really to remove people from eligibility for housing assistance rather than expanding resources to help more people get served. We saw similar legislation under the Trump administration. Then Secretary Ben Carson proposed legislation that would have tripled rents on the very lowest income seniors and people with disabilities in HUD housing, put in place work requirements, put in place time limits. They make the argument that those are what's needed to ensure the financial stability of these programs and to get through the waiting lists. And of course, we know that those are really red herrings, that time limits don't solve the larger housing affordability crisis. They don't create well-paying jobs for people so that they can afford their housing in the first place. But it's really a way of cutting down funding for programs. The last place I think that we're going to see legislation, at least on the House side, is around housing first and other solutions to homelessness. We've started to see a real backlash against proven solutions that we know work as unsheltered homelessness increases across the country, which is really unfortunate. And I think we're going to see that to some extent among House Republicans as well. This year, when legislation has been brought up on homelessness, Republicans voted in a party line vote on legislation that would undermine HUD's ability to prioritize housing first and to instead put resources into programs that have high barriers. So programs that might require sobriety in order for people to have access to housing. This is sort of a throwback to the 1980s where that was the policy that we used to address homelessness. And it was actually Republicans at the time who led the effort away from those policies because they were so expensive and ineffective. So it's disturbing to see Republicans sort of go back to that older policy that they initially railed against. All of that to say, any legislation that's needed next year is going to have to require 60 votes in the Senate. So the fact that Democrats have held on to the Senate is sort of a saving grace for much of this harmful legislation that we're likely to see. But I don't think we can take that for granted. We really need to be educating members of Congress about what the real solutions to the housing crisis are and to push back on harmful narratives or harmful measures that would cut funding or undermine the ability for people to have access to housing assistance. In terms of my takeaways, I think it's going to be extremely hard to govern next year with slim majorities in both the House and Senate. It really means that only a small number of members of Congress can upset the dynamics when it comes to negotiating, and I expect to see a lot of members try to use that authority. Republicans have said that they look to the model of Joe Manchin and what he was able to do and extract from Democrats this past year as a model for how they should be acting next year, which I think means it's going to be messy and chaotic a little bit. Again, the place where I think the greatest harm is going to be around spending cuts that will be made in exchange for raising the debt ceiling or in exchange for passing regular spending bills. I think we're going to definitely see Republicans offer harmful legislation, although it might not get through to the Senate side. And likewise, Democrats, I think, will have an opportunity to put forward their vision for housing. And to Tom's point earlier, Senator Brown will have an opportunity to really lay out what are the long-term solutions that are needed, even if it is ultimately hard to get enacted next year. All eyes are going to be on 2024, and so I expect that a lot of what we'll see over the next 2 years are really what each party sees as being their strongest talking points when it comes to housing, when it comes to other issues. And so there's going to be a real big dichotomy between what we see on the House side and what we see in the Senate. And with that, I will turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Let me add 2 comments, and then if any of you want to comment on what you had to say, or somebody else in the panel before we take the chat questions, we can do that. Joe mentioned the bond issue for housing that passed in Columbus. I would note that there were similar bond issues of similar magnitude passed in Kansas City, in Miami, in Austin, Texas. And I think I didn't get the final results, but I think there was a bond issue that did pass in Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's also noteworthy at the local level that for the first time, as far as I know, we have mayors of color in all our major cities. In addition, of course, our newly elected mayor here in Cleveland. That would be Los Angeles recently, Chicago, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. So I'm not quite sure what that would generally imply in terms of housing and community development issues, but I think it's worth noting. Do any of the three of you have further comments you would like to make? And then we'll see if anybody on the chat has additional questions or comments. Joe.
I would like to answer Philip's question. He asked who was behind the impetus for the Columbus bond issue to support affordable housing. A lot of groups had come together, groups that represent homeless, groups that represent home owners, even, a lot of realtors are saying, hey, we don't have the stock of housing that we need for people in lower levels of income. And so, there were a lot of people that came to the table on that, but you've also got to remember that Columbus is, it's got a Democratic mayor, Democratic City Council. It's basically a lot of Democrats in place that those are their major concerns to begin with. And we know that we have Intel coming. We have a lot of development happening here in the central Ohio area, and they are looking ahead at that, and they're trying to accomplish this goal as some of their agenda to basically make things better for residents in central Ohio.
Well, I would think, as Sarah pointed out, with problems at the federal level and particularly funding for affordable housing, it has made state and local governments more important in terms of raising funding. I noticed also Colorado had a statewide issue trying to put in place a permanent allocation method for affordable housing. So we may see interesting proposals pop up, maybe by initiative as well, in many of the states and local governments. Anybody else? Nash, we have chat questions for our panel.
Chris Harsh has his hand up, Dennis.
Chip?
Chris Harsh.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Hey, I'm a city councilman in Cleveland in Ward 13. I border Parma. And I did a lot of work with them this year. And as you know, Parma used to be the bluest of blue cities in Ohio, and Trump won, and then Trump won. And in this local cycle, the Republican candidate for county executive won Parma. The only two Democrats to win Parma were a local Sean Brennan, who ran for state house, is a well-liked, well-known guy who's been there for a long time, and Tim Ryan won Parma. So my question to y'all is, do you think Ohio's trends are because we're older and whiter, or do you think it's because the Democrats in those states run different bread and butter messages more so than maybe ours do?
Joe, and then Tom.
Okay, well, I think that it's older and whiter. I also think that we, like I indicated with the brain drain, I just look anecdotally at the young people around me. I teach at Ohio Wesleyan University, and I look at the students who attend there and, where they go after they leave. And most of them leave, even students from Ohio who were born and raised here. Many of them go to other states, and they, want to be in other states for different reasons. I was just talking last night to some OSU students, and we were asking them what their plans were, and all of them wanted to leave the state. They wanted to go to, we heard places like Denver, New York, Chicago, California, I think a couple of them wanted to go to, but it was places where they felt like it was more energetic, it was younger, and where they felt like they had an opportunity to do more of what they like, more things that are fitted more toward their lifestyle. And I think that's, that's the thing. They like having transit. They don't want to be driving a car, for example. That's not something that younger people really like. They don't put a lot of stock in that generally. They like to have a lot of art and entertainment. They like walkable communities. They like, the opportunity to be very diverse, and diversity is a huge thing when you talk to them. So I'll leave it at that and let someone else answer. But those are just some of the things that come up when I talk to people about why they're leaving the state. I would say diversity is a huge factor.
Well,
I would agree with Joe, and at Baldwin Wallace, I see a similar type of situation. We tend to be a much more regional school in terms of attracting students from Ohio. It's about 80% of our student population. And so we see a mix. The ones that are coming from rural areas are the most likely to want to at least leave that area, if not just leave the state. Definitely everything that Joe just said about what attracts them. So in terms of the Parma question, it's definitely a reflection of Parma, Trumbull, Mahoning, Lorraine, all these counties that are essentially getting older and whiter and more conservative. The irony that the Republican Party is becoming the blue collar party as a result of this shift. And quite frankly, for Democrats, it's a mix of things. Number one, the perception that Democratic parties have been taking people for granted. Number two, not seeing tangible policy results or tangible benefits, even if they're receiving things like public benefits. That's the perception. And number three, Democrats being branded as increasingly as the party that's bi-coastal, all the elites, et cetera. And to be honest and blunt, for Democrats, I haven't seen a whole lot of messaging that has countered that kind of image. Tim Ryan is a trailblazer in that respect. He also, in some ways, painted too narrow a lane because in some ways he was also perceived as ignoring Black voters in urban communities. And that may be some of why we saw a continuation of lower percentage turnout in Cleveland and in other cities with significant Black populations in Ohio. So I think there's a couple of things. Democrats need to look at the messaging. Number two, I think they need to think about new ways of building coalitions, particularly in rural and small town areas. And number three, let's not focus as much on trying to keep people here. Let's focus as much, at least, on trying to attract people from other places. And there, I would put at the center of that issue, and this really depends on the feds as much as anything else, immigration. Immigration is a big part of why some states are growing, people coming in from other places around the world. And it's also a big part of what's changing their political dynamics. Georgia being case study number one, right? Reliably red, reliably conservative. And they had 2 years ago, they elected a Black man and a Jewish man for the first time in the history of that state. We've got a runoff now between two Black men. Now, if you told anybody 25 years ago that that was ever going to happen in Georgia, they would be looking for Santa to come across the threshold and know that he was real too. So I think those are just some things to think about in terms of where Ohio is, because otherwise the trend that we're on is going to continue, and that's where we are.
Somebody
I don't
else?
have any answers to that, but you might also want to look at states in your area that overperformed with Democrats. I'm thinking of Michigan and Pennsylvania to see what was different there that could be applied to Ohio. But I'm not deep on that political side. Just the policy side.
Well, Michigan, one big thing that happened was that they created a nonpartisan redistricting commission that went into effect with the 2020 redistricting, and it flipped their General Assembly from a Republican to Democrat. And also they had the abortion issue on the ballot, which passed as it did, either for or against limiting abortion in 4 other states, including Kansas. So that was some of it. Pennsylvania is in some way an odd state because it has 2 metropolis areas, one of which is huge, Philadelphia. And it really is, in some ways, we call it 3 states, right? Western, Eastern, and then that central area, which is what makes it so unpredictable in its politics.
And Michigan has one too, just one
Right.
urban core.
Just one, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else?
You know, I go back to the whole idea that the small towns and the rural areas, Democrats are underperforming there. And if you look at other places where they did better in those small towns and rural areas, they had issues on the ballot that spoke to some of the things that were happening there. And the abortion issue, as you just mentioned, that's huge. That was everywhere that they've seemed to have an abortion issue on the ballot, it has drawn Democrats, it has drawn people to the polls, and then they vote down the ticket. I think that's a key is, you've got to give people a reason to be engaged. And in Ohio, in this past election, a lot of Democrats obviously were not engaged for some reason. So I think that's the thing that Democrats are going to have to be looking at now is figuring out why people are not turning out, and honestly, why some are voting against their best interest. I mean, I'm always amused when I look at some of these polls and what people say is important to them and what they think, and then how they vote, because it doesn't match a lot of times. So I think that's something, when you're talking about other states that performed a little bit better for Democrats, I think those are the kind of things that they're going to be looking at and drilling down on, especially going into the next huge general election with Sherrod Brown up for re-election.
Let me ask you, Sarah, about home ownership. There was previously today a study mentioned about the disparity. I guess Sherrod Brown's highlighted this between white and minority groups in terms of the rates of home ownership. And then more recently, with the increase in mortgage interest rates, even in beyond cities that are incredibly expensive, like West Coast cities or some of the East Coast cities, do you see any agreement nationally about doing something, particularly about starter homes? I guess there's been much mention of younger people that might want to actually own a home. Increasingly difficult even to have a down payment, much less being able to afford a house.
That's a good question. I think that there might be agreement among Democrats and Republicans that they want the situation to be different and would want more people to be able to be homeowners. But what that solution is and how much it would cost are probably the dividing lines that I think will prevent anything significant happening this year. So for example, Democrats have a down payment assistance plan that they've really been putting a lot of weight behind. It was in the Build Back Better Act. I don't see a path forward with that. And that's largely because Republicans are really weary of spending more resources, spending more dollars. And so if there are other changes that could be made or proposed regulatory changes or tweaks to existing programs that could make them work better, I think that's where I would focus my energy more so than more resources. I also think that there's that perennial question in Congress about what to do with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And that could be a place where changes could be made that would help increase home ownership or increase resources to build more affordable housing through the Housing Trust Fund, for example. But it's just very hard to imagine that the players involved can come to the table and reach an agreement because they are so far apart on what their vision is for the future. And also because while Fannie and Freddie have still been in conservatorship, they've kicked off a lot of money to Treasury. And so there's no real harm in allowing that current system to stay in place, because if anything, it's helping to address some of those spending issues that Republicans are concerned about. So there's no real crisis at hand yet that might force people to the table.
Anybody else?
I had one quick one. One of the things that I noticed was we had precincts on the east side of Cleveland that had a 7% turnout rate. And I think your colleague did a map in the Plain Dealer showing just how low the turnout was on the east side of Cleveland. And I'd be interested in knowing, I mean, that terrific needs for housing on the east side of Cleveland. Why is there just such a disconnect between the need and the voting turnout?
Huh?
All right, I'm going to jump in here. I've been holding my tongue for a little bit of time,
Yep, go ahead, Zach.
but because I cut across a few demographics. I was raised in Trumbull County. My father was an elected Democratic coroner. I'm also a law professor, so I have interaction with the Utes, and I happen to be 35. So I'm in that awesome generation that got screwed by 2008, right in the shorts, and decided not to move, but rather to stay and fight. And oh, by the way, I also work in Slavic Village, which is on the east side of Cleveland, and is a part of that 7% low turnout rate. And these are things that I have wrestled with as a younger person for a while. And shout out to all the other folks here who happen to fall into that category. Speaking specifically to Chip's point, before I kind of roll on to other things, when you, I'm sure we can all recall the Lucy and Charlie Brown routine where she pulls the football out, and every time kind of convinces Charlie Brown to just get back up and do it again. And I will tell you that I would, having spoken not only with my peers, but also with many members of that community with whom I regularly interact, engage, and sometimes actually provide legal counsel to, that the general sense, particularly among folks who live in the areas that you are describing, is that they are Charlie Brown and the Democratic Party is Lucy. Quite frankly, understanding that the assumption that low to moderate income communities or communities of color are monoliths, and that they are all marching in lockstep to the beat of the Democratic Party's drum, is, I think, one of the most fatal errors that the Democratic Party has made really since the 1960s. And in that regard, I think that there are only so many times that Charlie Brown wants to line up to get the football pulled away before they just say, you know what, I'm not interested in playing the game anymore. And I think that's really at the crux of what, particularly in metro areas like Cleveland, and also like the area that I grew up in, Trumbull County, Warren, Ohio, was a solidly blue. I mean, Youngstown, Sheeton too. You want to talk about radical unions? We can all look at the work of Stoughton Lind, may he rest in peace, and the work that he did in the aftermath of Youngstown, Sheeton too. But the fact of the matter is that there's only so many times that Charlie Brown's going to line up to kick that football before they say, you know what, this game ain't for me. Speaking more specifically, I think, to the motivations of young people, I obviously see them in a different context because I'm working with law students. The accepted wisdom is that you go to law school in the city that you want to practice in, because that's where your alumni base is, that's where your connections are, that's where the firms that will likely hire you happen to be. And for the students that I mentor in both the clinical program that I co-teach as well as in the externship program, there's an incredible frustration with the bureaucracy that exists at both the municipal and the county levels. And kids today, and I call them kids, even though they're not, I mean, I'm only about 10 years or so older than them. they have full access to the internet. And they can look and see other jurisdictions. There's one 2 hours away from here called the city of Columbus, Ohio, where things don't seem to be so dysfunctional. And they say, why do I want to start my legal career in this particular environment when I can go elsewhere and have a much better quality of life and have much less headaches that I need to deal with? And it's unfortunately falls to folks like me and others who are mentoring students to convince them to say, hey, you know what? A system is only good as the people in it, and we need you here to help make the change. And that's the argument that I think, particularly for folks who are at the point of getting a professional degree, that are younger, to say, there's a place for you here, that this isn't a wait your turn situation. Which is another criticism, I think, that can be levied against particularly party politics. That this is a place where you can have a place and that your voice will be heard. Thank you. I cede my time.
Anybody else? We're running out of time here, but
We're almost out of time, yeah. Are there any more questions in the chat?
So can I ask a quick question for representative from National Income Housing Coalition? Given the change that's occurred in Washington, what are their priorities for advocacy? Because it's quite concerning that there are going to be efforts to trade off existing benefits against, the budget. And I'm wondering what they're going to be pushing over the next year, given where the House is at.
Yeah, it's a great question. We're still trying to think that through about exactly what that will look like. But I think it means that, one, we're going to try to pursue as much as we can through the administration as possible, since that's a much clearer path to getting things done in a divided Congress. And then two, we will engage with Republicans where we can, where we overlap. There are a number of things that I think that we are actually aligned with Republicans on in the House Financial Services Committee, things around better oversight, greater transparency of programs, tweaks to modernize programs and make them more streamlined, more efficient, more targeted. I think there's a lot of potential room for agreement there. So we'll try to pursue that and encourage it. But we'll also have to play a lot of defensive work. And so we might be aligned with Republicans when it comes to maybe modernizing CDBG, but we will oppose them just as strongly when it comes to things that would undermine housing first or work requirements. So it's going to there's going to be a lot of, seeing the opportunities that are at hand, seeing the threats and taking different steps. It's not going to be all one thing, one clear thing next year.
okay, well,
Frank Ford has his hand up.
Yeah, where are we at with time? Doesn't this session go to 1:10?
Well, we're going to one, I think, actually.
One.
The agenda says 1:10. So we changed the agenda?
Yeah. Well, we're waiting for any other questions or comments for the panel. Because otherwise, I think we're done.
Frank, do you have a question?
Sure.
Frank Ford?
I don't know.
Your
if it's a
hands up.
question. I was
Your
gonna.
hands up.
Yeah. I think this question of the politics, Democrat, Republican, is pretty complex, and I don't disagree with anything anybody said, but I had a thought that I haven't heard yet. So I don't know how extreme it is or not. And I'm even a little worried about so many of us like me work at a nonprofit tax exempt organization where we're not supposed to be partisan in our thoughts and conversations. And I'm going to express one and we'll see what the fallout is. But when I was thinking about why did Parma go from blue to red? Why do working class whites, why have they switched to become supporters of Republicans? Why are they voting that way? And one thing that occurred to me is it seems the Republicans, and not Republicans officially, so I'm not sure this is some doctrine, but there's something coming out of the Republican Party. Two things. One is basically making it okay to say that blacks are stealing your jobs, they're dangerous, they commit crimes. We don't want them living in our neighborhoods. I mean, things that would not have been articulated 20 years ago, the way they're being articulated now, to put fear in the minds of people who are white, particularly working class white. And the second thing is to make it almost okay to say those things, that it's become okay in our discourse. You hear it on news channels, you hear, it's not just Trump, although he's probably been the main one, but there are many others that it's almost become okay to articulate things that are racist that wouldn't have been okay 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. And so the combination of both effectively creating fear in the minds of white working class people who might have voted Democratic before, combined with the fact that it's become almost acceptable to say and do things that would never have been acceptable before. I don't know. I just think that doesn't, like, I'm not disagreeing with anything that's been said so far. I'm just adding another complexity, another possible factor that I just wonder if that's happening. Or I feel like it's happening, and if somebody doesn't agree with me, okay, but I feel it's happening.
Frank, it's happening. It's happening. The two most effective ways to get people to pay attention and to vote for you are to instill either fear and or pride. And the Republicans have captured both very effectively. Trump broke all the rules, and every pundit, including me and political scientists across the land, said, there's no way he's going to win that primary. There's no way he's going to win that election. And of course, we know what the result was. And he made all of those things acceptable. And let's understand clearly that the underlying demographic dynamics of this country are that we will become a majority minority country by now probably 2040. We thought it was 2050, but it's probably closer to 2040. And we've seen this happen periods through our history where there's this sense of an identity crisis. It's more than economics, it's more than jobs, et cetera. It's about who are we as a people? And that's typically motivated by seeing lots of people who we, the society, think are not part of us. And so we either try to assimilate them or we fight against them. Going all the way back to the know-nothings, we've seen it, we saw it after World War I. I call it the cicada effect. There's this dark underground that periodically pops up, flies around. We have a lot of problems as a result of it. We have to get past it. And that's kind of where we're at right now with our politics.
I appreciate that. Can I just add one more thing and then I'll shut up? That it seems that for those of us who are with 501c3 organizations, it begs the question, when is it okay for us to talk about this? And I think that we all have, those of us who are with nonprofit tax exempt organizations have a reluctance. I had to think about it. Do I really want to say this on this meeting today? Anyway, I'm done.
You can't back candidates, but you can talk about issues as a 501c3. That's a big difference.
Yep. Joe, you were.
Yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, I noticed that a lot of the churches are violating actually the whole idea of being, tax exempt and speaking out. There's been a lot of documentation about that if you read. So I think, that it's something that they really don't crack down on like they used to, or was once perceived that they used to do. But I think there's a big issue here too. Being someone from a suburban county that's been known to be Republican, and also I grew up in Southern Ohio in one of these counties that traditionally goes red. And one thing I see that is happening is Christian nationalism. There's a lot of people who want prayer back in the school. They want the drag queens not to be reading to the children in school. They want control of the school, the agenda of what could people read, and they don't like sending their kids off to universities where they could become woke. So, there's a lot of that going on, and it plays into that fear thing, as you mentioned. And I think that's something that you know, people are going to have to, if the Democrats are going to be successful in the future, they're going to have to deal with that in a way that they can reach those folks and let them see value to bring them back into the fold. Because right now, a lot of people are trending away.
Okay, Chip, I guess we could spend the rest of the day.
Yeah, we could do that forever.
But I think you're about to end this panel, which I would like to thank our panelists, Joe and Tom and Sarah, for their sharing their time with us and their views on a lot of important issues. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Thank you, guys. Terrific stuff. So as we turn over to our final panel, which is on health and racism, we'll solve that problem as we go in the early afternoon. So Keith Benjamin, are you there?
I am here. I'm trying
All
to
right.
get
This is
video.
your panel. So I'm turning it over to you.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some technical issues here. Just one moment.
We had our technical issues early in the morning.
I'm hooking up to my hotspot because I keep losing my Wi-Fi here. Okay. Hopefully that will straighten things out here. Access to safe, quality, affordable housing is one of the most powerful social determinants of health. It's a basic need and everyone needs access. The County Board of Health and Cleveland Department of Health consider fair housing to be a critical issue. A central challenge is fair housing and source of, excuse me, let me get a drink of water here. I'm losing my voice as well. Source of income protections in our communities. And this afternoon, we're joined by Roger Sykes from the County Board of Health and Lita Marie Wills from Cleveland Department of Health, and also Naima O'Neill from the Ryan White Planning Council. And I'd like to turn it over to Roger to begin discussions regarding source of income and public health disparities. Roger.
All right. How's it going, y'all? Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. And I'm gonna log off and reconnect because I'm having some issues here.
Okay, awesome. Well, hey, it's great to be here with y'all. Yeah, my name is Roger Sykes. I work at the Cuyahoga County Board of Health. I've been sitting in as much as I can to the previous conversations and panels, and I'm soaking it all in. I really appreciate the kind of actionable, strategic conversation and active connections, that are being made, and I'm hoping that we can do that, throughout our panel as well, particularly connecting public health departments, both Cleveland Department of Public Health and County Board of Health to y'all who are actively organizing around these issues and hopefully getting our health departments to add more value and relevance around housing issues and housing policy. Let's see. Yeah. Today we're gonna dig in a little bit to what is the role of public health departments in Cuyahoga County, as it relates to housing. Where have we been in the past, and what are we working towards in the future? And again, how can we be more relevant? We've had maybe a particular focus around source of income protections, preventing source of income discriminations as one of the maybe first forays and actually delving into a housing issue through our public health departments. So as a quick primer on health departments in Cuyahoga County, we have the Cuyahoga County Board of Health and the Cleveland Department of Public Health. So the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, that's where I work at. We work with all of the cities and villages and townships in Cuyahoga County. That's part of our service area. So, roughly 850,000 residents. And then we also have the Cleveland Department of Public Health. And we have an all-star who will be talking later from CDPH, Lita. And so they represent the city of Cleveland, the largest, city in the county. One thing that I'll note that I'm excited about and I think is relevant is on this issue around source of income protections, but also building perhaps a shared public health analysis around housing. Both of our health departments are united and we're collaborating on this issue. I did share in the chat a shared issue brief that both of our health departments released, and I believe Keith, just brought it up here. Just to note that, hey, both health departments, we're coming together, we're working on this, we're trying to figure out where we fit and how we can add value. Both of our health departments agree that, housing justice issues, housing stability is inextricably linked with public health outcomes. Historically at our health department, we've had an analysis, looking at red line neighborhoods in Cuyahoga County as kind of a place-based analysis of health. And as y'all can imagine and have probably seen, a lot of the health inequities that we see in Cuyahoga County are concentrated in the same areas where redlining occurred. So that can be anything from, I'll say that maybe the two kind of canary in a coal mine indicators that public health, will look at and really demonstrates a real sensitive indicator of the overall health of a community is going to be life expectancy. How many years are folks living in certain neighborhoods? And then also infant mortality rates. Those two, there's many indicators, but those are definitely two sensitive ones that kind of demonstrate the overall health and well-being of an area. And certainly in redlined areas or areas that were, historically redlined, we see extreme differences in life expectancy, over 23 years in Cuyahoga County, just depending on the neighborhood that you're living in. And then infant mortality rates, we see extreme unjust differences in infant mortality rates. And a lot of that is concentrated in neighborhoods that were historically redlined and disproportionately affect African-American residents. So certainly this is a racial justice issue. And so for source of income protections, and I know a lot of y'all are experts, on this, but I mean, briefly, source of income discrimination is the practice where, where landlords can deny tenants housing simply based on their source of income. So if a tenant is using a voucher or sometimes referred to Section 8 recipients, across the county, in most cities in our county, it's perfectly legal for a landlord to say, hey, y'all can't live here just because you have a voucher. There are some cities in our county that have moved source of income protections, and kudos to them. South Euclid, Keith, shout out to y'all, and Sally Martin and the mayor have done a lot of work on that. And other cities, Cleveland Heights, University Heights, Lindale, and I think Warrensville Heights, who have moved it in Cuyahoga County. Other cities like Columbus, Toledo across our state, have moved it as well. In Cuyahoga County, there's about 16,000 folks who are using vouchers. About 80–90% of voucher holders are African-American. So when there's discrimination towards people who have vouchers, that can be a proxy for racial discrimination. And in practice, what we see, and shout out to the Fair Housing Center for doing some wonderful research on this, the same neighborhoods that were redlined back in the 1930s and 40s, that's where we see a concentration of voucher recipients. You can see that's where most voucher holders exist and live in those neighborhoods, in part because of the discrimination that exists across the county. It can be more challenging to get a landlord that's willing to work with folks who use vouchers in the inner ring and outer ring suburbs. So gosh, and from a public health perspective, the list can kind of go on and on in relation to housing stability and health outcomes. I mentioned life expectancy, infant mortality rates, mental health outcomes, death rates from chronic disease, stroke, cancer rates, et cetera. It's all concentrated in the same areas in Cuyahoga County. And so that's perhaps why our health departments are really starting to dig in around source of income protections as a way to address this, because it has direct racial justice implications, and it has direct implications around where families can choose to live if they use vouchers. So in the last couple of years, we know a lot of governments have released statements about announcing racism as a public health crisis. This is in the wake of the murderous actions of Derek Chauvin towards George Floyd, and there was a flurry of statements that were released, locally, county government, Cuyahoga County government released a statement declaring racism a public health crisis. The city of Cleveland did so. Our Cuyahoga County Board of Health did so. And we're somewhat independent of county government. We have five board members who govern us. We certainly relate to county council and the county executive, but we have some level of independence. So all of us have released these statements, and there's a critique out there as to, okay, the statements have been released. That's wonderful. That's important. Now what actions are we taking? What specific actions are we taking to put this crisis and to kind of act on this crisis? And I would say from our health department's perspective, trying to move source of income protections is an example of an action that we can take. And I'll say as a staff member, so I'm a program manager at the Cuyahoga County Board of Health. I'll say for me, having our board come out with a statement that clearly states racism as a public health crisis and includes housing justice as one of those components, it does help me in my ability to move and to advocate and to prioritize housing issues in my day-to-day work. And even speaking here, it gives me more space perhaps, to do that. And, we hope to leverage that as much as we can. Maybe moving on just briefly to thinking through a little bit like the relevance and strength and perhaps power of our health departments. And this is where I'm hoping, at the end of our conversation, I'd love to hear more from folks on this call as to what gaps we can fill, what value we bring, and how we can leverage our power as health departments. But at the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, we have about a $25 million annual budget, we have about 160 staff people. And the way that our relationship with local municipalities works is that we engage with city councils and mayors across the county, and certainly public workers across the county, in building departments, et cetera. And so, I think when the public health voice, especially when it's coming from both public health departments, I think that can add a power or perhaps a legitimacy and or another angle with which to provide urgency around housing justice policies. So how can we, work with, the city of Lakewood City Council members? How can we work with Maple Heights City Council members? And kind of what we're doing right now and what we've been building on with South Euclid. South Euclid has done, I think, some really forward-thinking work, and they've really distinguished themselves with the housing justice policies that they moved. But can our health department maybe connect folks like Keith, to leaders in Lakewood, who has some interest in moving these policies? And can we, maybe add just a public health voice to this if there might be concerns or, there might be some hesitancy to make some bold moves on this. I think just other maybe assets that we might bring is epidemiologists. We have a lot of folks who are looking at data and clarifying that public health outcomes are very much involved with housing, and to really bring that as a core framework for why there should be urgency around more fair housing policies, such as source of income protections. I think also there can be grant opportunities. We relate to the Centers for Disease Control and different kind of public health funding streams at the state and national level. And I think we can do more with really combining the links between housing stability and preventing infant mortality, housing stability, and access to decent grocery stores or mental health outcomes. And so I do think there's some good opportunities there. And as I mentioned, the issue brief, the shared issue brief that we have is in the chat. So, have a look at it if you can. I'm also going to leave my contact information just in the chat. I'd love to, talk more with folks, after this conference. But yeah, with that, I will stop there and.
Great. And thank you. I think I figured out all of my technology issues now. So as Roger had mentioned, South Euclid has one of the strongest and most comprehensive fair housing and non-discrimination laws in Northeast Ohio. And we've been joined since our passage by a handful of other communities that have passed source of income protections. And I think Roger mentioned those are, in addition to South Euclid, University Heights, Warrensville Heights, Lindale, and I believe in Lake County, Wickliffe is the only city that has passed source of income protections. And I can tell you that in South Euclid, it's been hard work. We've really pride ourselves on being a progressive, diverse, and inclusive community. And back in 2018, our elected leaders were not afraid or hesitant to propose and enact civil and human rights laws that improve the lives of those that historically have faced discrimination. One of those, as part of our comprehensive non-discrimination laws, were source of income protections. And I'll talk a little bit about what has transpired since we've passed source of income protections in South Euclid. But first, I'd like to hand it over to Lita Marie Wills, who's the Cleveland Commissioner of Health, Equity, and Social Justice at the Cleveland Department of Public Health. And Lita, you just let me know when you'd like me to share your PowerPoint. Want me to start now?
Yeah, you can start, because as I'll talk, it'll go really quickly, I hope, and
Sure.
go right through. You can probably go to slide 3 after my name.
Okay, one moment.
Yep. So as Keith said, I'm Lita Wills. I'm from the Cleveland Department of Public Health. I am in a brand new division. Well, I say brand new, but it's been about 1.5 years. It's taken some time to get this foundation built. This division was created, and I'll kind of go over how and why we created this division here at City of Cleveland. As you're aware, through what Roger went over with you and through the issue brief, this is about our local 2 public health departments coming together around this specific issue to do with housing, specifically around source of income, but also, looking at the broader issue of the impact that housing has and fair housing has on public health overall. So this division was created here at City of Cleveland after the June 2020 declaration of our declaration of racism as a public health crisis, and through resolution 296/2020. This had been in the works actually for some time prior to June of 2020. And then of course the events of May and June of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd certainly accelerated this process, but the impetus for it was already there based on a lot of the data that Roger talked about and the study around life expectancy, and really looking at health issues as they pertain to things like leftover from slavery, Jim Crow laws, from our redlining issues. So beyond that, as he said, a lot of municipalities made the same type of declaration. And so what we did further was in March of 2021, City Council put up another ordinance that established the Division of Health, Equity, and Social Justice to be placed here at the Department of Public Health. The mission of this division is to improve health outcomes and overall quality of life for our most disadvantaged populations in order to create thriving neighborhoods in a thriving city. This also coincides with current Mayor Justin Bibb's equity action recommendations that were part of his transition report in January of 2022. We are also working with the Office of Equal Opportunity at City Hall. That declaration did a couple of things. That first declaration allowed for the standing up of this division focused specifically on health, equity, and social justice. Also allowed for, at the time, City Council to create a working group. At the time, it was Racism as a Public Health Crisis Working Group. It's now a coalition. You can move over to the next slide. That coalition consists of community members, leaders who've been doing this type of work in City of Cleveland for a long time. It's headed up and co-chaired by Marcia Maccabee at the Urban League, and Helen Forbes Fields, who's now at YWCA, and just a plethora of folks who are concerned with how we are looking at and connecting the dots between racism and poor health outcomes. And to do that, we are looking at using social determinants of health as a way to measure our equity work. So you see that little graphic on the right that talks about, this is, straight from the CDC, social determinants of health. So when we talk about housing, that's clearly part of neighborhood and built environment. It's something that is that has a major impact and influence on all of our overall health. as does economic stability and mobility, as does education access and quality of education, as does healthcare access and quality, as does social and community context. So when you talk about social and community context, thinking about things like our criminal justice system and some of the disparities that are involved there, thinking about things like the number of kids in our county who are moving in and out of the foster care system, the number of kids in our county who may have a parent that's incarcerated, those types of issues that can create some disparities. And so thinking about those 5-point social determinants of health as they relate to equity, it helps us to understand how to connect health outcomes to real everyday, real-time issues and things that we have an impact on. So the way that we're working this is 3 ways. Within the Division of Health, we've created this division so that we have now several programs that have been part of Cleveland Department of Public Health for a number of years that were previously in our health division, have moved over to health equity and social justice because there are very apparent and visible disparities for Black and Brown folks in our community with relation to, and I'll name off the 3 programs that are now in my portfolio, our HIV STI project, our Moms First program, which is for infant mortality and maternal health, and also our Office of Mental Health and Substance Use Disorders. So those programs are now falling under the umbrella of HESJ to, one, give them a bit more focus and support, but also to really start to be able to hone in on the equity issues that are at play within those and to reduce some of those disparities. And in order to do that, we really have to connect the dots between those health issues and social determinants of health, of which housing is a major factor. We consider here at the health department housing to be kind of the underpinning, fair housing to be the underpinning of all of these social determinants of health. Where you live determines your health outcomes. Where you live determines where you go to school. Where you live determines your economic stability. These are all very interconnected. So the other piece of this that we're doing, aside from the programs in the health department and those direct services, is this division is responsible for working across departments at the City of Cleveland. So looking to operationalize equity and policy, practices, procedures, the services that we as a city, a municipality, provide to our residents. So not just thinking about health outcomes as a direct result of something only the health department deals with, but thinking about it across city government. So looking at our Department of Building and Housing, Department of Aging, Department of Youth and Family Success, our Public Safety Department. So what we've done is created an interdepartmental equity team, which has representation from all across city government to really look at social determinants of health and connect the dots between each social determinant back to the department that's providing services and looking at our policies, practices, and procedures within that. We'll be developing a strategic plan around that to really look at what critical indicator areas we want to measure and focus on, and what are the critical issues that we need to focus on first with regard to these 5 social determinants, of which, you know, housing and things like lead abatement are going to be right up there in that critical area. So that's internal to City of Cleveland. That RAFC coalition that I mentioned, Racism as a Public Health Crisis Coalition, and all those external providers and external area experts that are on this, they're working and putting up their pillars of work across social determinants also. So at the end of the day, what they're doing externally as a public-private partnership with the City of Cleveland to really look at the connection between equity and health outcomes and quality of life, we're also doing on the inside of City of Cleveland government. And at the end of the day, the work of both of those will kind of come to a pinnacle in the middle and meet in the middle, so that we're not just creating new policies here at City of Cleveland government, but we're also affecting change external. What does that look like when we talk about operationalizing equity? What kind of things might we have an influence on? So think about conditions like family wage jobs and job training, early childhood development, strong, vibrant neighborhoods, access to safe and efficient transportation, community and public safety, equitable law and justice system, access to affordable, healthy foods, access to equity and government practices, access to parks and natural resources, affordable, safe, quality housing. So this is, you know, how we're looking at something that seems like it's a given, is affordable, safe housing, but it really ties into all of these other issues that we're trying to mitigate before they become a public health issue, right? So I'm going to stop there, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood sort of the city of Cleveland's kind of what now, you know, after we've done this declaration, what are the things that we're trying to focus on at this point? Thanks, Keith.
Great. Thank you, Lita. Next up is Naima O'Neill is with the Ryan White Planning Council, and she's a licensed medical social worker at the Centers Uptown location, where she works with people living with HIV and the interdisciplinary medical teams that provide care and support. Prior to this, she's worked as an HIV test coordinator and as I mentioned earlier, serves on as a member of the Ryan White HIV Planning Council. Naima has a lot of work in the HIV community, and she's dealt with, through her social work, a lot of the policy issues and the complexity of HIV disclosures and how to approach it. She's a wife, mother, grandmother of 3, and lastly, Naima has been living with HIV for the past 30 years. And when we talk about public health disparities and source of income, most people think about housing vouchers and CMHA. But in talking about health disparities, this adds another level to that it's not just about housing vouchers, it's also about disability, source of income, other sources of income as well. So I'll turn it over to Naima.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. And I too, like Roger, has been listening in on the conference for most of the day, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I do think that I'm speaking to the choir, but I would like to share that a lot of people who are living with HIV have vouchers for various reasons. And like myself, I had a voucher when my kids were little. And so trying to find housing, particularly in a neighborhood where there was a park that me and my girls could walk to, where there was adequate food and anything that we needed, wasn't necessarily a given depending on where I was allowed to move. And I say the word allowed because a lot of people would not accept the voucher that I had at that time. And so I think what the important conversation that Roger and Lita has been talking about is that we not only have to worry about people owning homes, but we also have to worry about people who are living with HIV, who may have some mental substance abuse or mental health abuse, substance abuse, living in neighborhoods that are high in those areas. And so we're really allowing them to connect with people, places, and things that don't necessarily help them to stay clean and sober. And when you don't have housing, you don't care about taking your medication. What is the point in that? Because you, A, don't have a place to store it, and B, if you don't have adequate housing and maybe you are not out with your status, so that means that you have to hide your medication. Sometimes people forget to take what they need to take. And so if we really want to help our community in terms of having a healthy community, we need to work on the people who are living not only with HIV, but other illnesses that need our support in terms of living somewhere where they want to live. A lot of people living with HIV live in food deserts. They lack transportation, so that means that they're on a bus. And I know that these are personal issues that they have to deal with, but I think if we level the playing field and give people an opportunity to want to live where they want to live, and also be in an area that promotes healthy living. And until we do that, we're always going to have this disconnect in terms of how are we going to end HIV in my lifetime? And I don't think that we will, because we're not dealing with the whole pie. we're dealing with pieces and we're in silos. And so we're working on this. So we're telling people to take their medication, but we're not helping them have a safe place to live. We're telling people to disclose their status, but their mental health and other issues are not allowing them to necessarily do that. So if you're talking about it takes a village to help a community, I believe that we need to work on that because we all have a stake in it. We all have a stake in ending HIV. And even though you may not know about HIV, you may not even deal with it in your sense, but it's a community issue and we need to treat it as a community issue so that we can help get rid of it. I sit on the Ryan White Planning Council. I chair the consumer leg of the Planning Council, and we've talked about housing as a disparity. A lot of people are really not understanding that it has more to do with who owns the house, how they keep the house up. And even the lack of vouchers in the community, a lot of people feel that that's something that we need to work on. So when I had my voucher, sometimes I was able to live in a neighborhood that was good, but it lacked certain things. So again, leveling that playing field. If every area had a park that people could walk to, if every area had a good grocery store that people could walk to. And so maybe not moving to those communities, but working on the communities that we have right now and investing in trying to build up, getting rid of food deserts and making it so that people, if they live in that neighborhood, could have some of the same advantages as people who live in the suburbs. And I know that that's a pie in the sky attitude, but it's the attitude that I think that we could work if we truly want to help the whole community to thrive and be healthy. I'll be willing to ask any question that people want to ask. I don't know how much more I can say because a lot of people on this call already know the issues and some of them are working on them. And so I'm hoping that we can reach out and pull people in because this housing issue, especially when I'm trying to find housing for my patients, is a real issue. And a lot of them couch surf, which you lose things, you're not able to hold on to your medicine sometimes. And so it affects their health. So health and housing kind of go together. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Naima. And you mentioned not just providing source of income in some of our places that haven't passed it, but improving the areas where people are living now. And Roger, I know that you have a lot of experience on the job and also in your personal life of working to bring new healthy grocery stores and parks and playgrounds to some of these places. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, and also maybe the role or value of public health departments in engaging there. And I'll maybe give an example. I don't know if y'all have been to Farmer Jones Market over in Maple Heights. I want to give them a big shout out. So just a brief story there. Farmer Jones Market, it's a storied market in Maple Heights. The history of providing fresh produce, meats, and they've been a real neighborhood anchor. When the COVID pandemic hit in, 2019, 2020 now, Farmer Jones Market closed, in part because of the economic fallout that they were dealing with. But what happened is the mayor of Maple Heights, got together with a Red All Green Partnership, a local organization that does awesome environmental justice work. And they have a great campus over in Kinsman, if y'all haven't been there. And other actors, our County Board of Health was in the mix trying to support. But essentially, the Farmer Jones Market was reopened under the management of Red All Green Partnership, which is a nonprofit organization. So now we have, a small grocer that's being managed by a nonprofit who certainly has, a similar maybe mission or values that align with community interest. So the role that our health department has played is, trying to get grant funding their way, trying to help with getting the word out as we can, really troubleshooting issues, but also looking at, hey, can this model be used elsewhere? Is this something, nonprofit ownership or management of grocery stores? Is that something that we can look at? But in there is a collaborative effort over in Maple Heights. And if y'all haven't checked it out, it's on Broadway Avenue, right near Maple Heights High School. What I love about it is you can park right near the door, pop in 5 minutes, and you grab fresh local produce. It's pretty affordable, and then you pop out. So it's kind of a unique example, but that's just one way. Our health department is looking at that. We view that as a strategic, grocery location that we want to help to stabilize as much as we can. We've done other work, with parks. We've done a lot of work at parks. Trying to get public basketball courts implemented. Naeem and I have talked about this a little bit, and then in addition to that, having like youth mentoring programs at the public basketball courts as a violence prevention method. Again, that all goes back to, getting these quality parks or improving them in locations that need it, and trying to improve neighborhoods and do relevant stuff in those neighborhoods. But I'll maybe stop there.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. I'd like to just talk a little bit about South Euclid and our experience. Since 2018, I can tell you that the negative consequences that many of those who are against the passage of source of income protections have not materialized. Our housing values have continued to rise between 16 and 18% and are now back to or have far exceeded the pre-2008 foreclosure crisis. The number of rental units in the community has not increased. Historically, approximately 10% of our 10,000 households have been rental housing. That number has actually decreased in the last few years. And crime has not increased because landlords must accept housing choice vouchers. As a matter of fact, many of our landlords have found that renters who utilize housing vouchers are just as, if not more, responsible because they're at risk of losing their voucher permanently if there are criminal or nuisance issues associated with them living there. South Euclid is not experiencing increased blight because of our source of income laws. Of course, we also have very strong code enforcement programs and nuisance abatement programs and rental registration programs that serves to keep our neighborhoods stable. We have had some challenges. Many landlords, even though they fill out and acknowledge that they're aware of our source of income laws when they register every year, I think are just checking a box and don't realize that we have these laws in place. So there's a lot of education that we need to continue to do to educate our landlords that we have this source of income law in place, and that if they don't follow that law, there will be implications to that. And in particular, we need to create and have better working relationship with CMHA to make it easier for landlords to get through the registration and inspection process. That's probably when we hold our fair housing annually, at least once a year, we have a fair housing and landlord-tenant seminar with the Fair Housing Center on Rights and Research. And that's probably one of the biggest complaints that we receive from landlords is the length of time that it takes to go through the process with CMHA. And so we have begun to work with them to address that issue and hope to have a training session with CMHA for landlords early in the coming years. I'm also an elected official in another city, and I understand some of the concerns by some of my colleagues, and especially those in the exurbs, have regarding these issues, but and passing source of income. But I can attest that since South Euclid has enacted our comprehensive non-discrimination laws, including source of income, our community has not suffered any major negative impacts. So I guess the question becomes, and for part of the conversation here with some of the time we have left, is, you know, the option of doing this piecemeal, community by community. And I know that I see Chris from the Fair Housing Center. And by the way, the Fair Housing Center and Rights and Research, if I hadn't said it, they have been extremely helpful and provided major support to the city, to myself, and to city council when we went through the process of updating our fair housing laws for source of income. We hold regular landlord-tenant trainings with them, and they are an incredible resource. So I want to thank the Fair Housing Center for all that they do and for being a great resource in our community. But going back, I guess, to my initial question is, what is best for Cuyahoga County? Is it easier for us, even though it'll take longer for us to go city by city and work to have individual communities pass source of income? Or is it better to address this from the county issue and have source of income protections countywide through passage of legislation by county council? And if any of our panelists want to speak first, and then we can open it up to those in attendance for remarks and questions as well.
I don't know that it's better to go city by city. However, that seems to be a bit how it's happening. And I know that for those of us in advocacy situations where we're trying to get more information out about this, it's so helpful to us to be able to lean on the cities that have done it already to use for advocacy as we are talking to our own elected officials, as well as, you know, trying to move it in the way that, you know, we have to be careful as health departments, but we certainly can't advocate. And so to have those examples to give and to educate are immensely helpful.
I also think that going city by city is good, but I also think that we don't have the time to wait. So if a city is going to be difficult about it, then we need to keep moving to cities that aren't, and then come back to the ones that are more difficult and more challenging to work with. So because the time is of the essence. They have a campaign that's out to end HIV by a certain year. And housing and having healthy housing is going to be part of that. So if we're going to accomplish ending HIV in my lifetime, we need to work on housing and health issues and getting people affordable housing, healthy foods to eat, and encouraging them to take their medication because they do have affordable housing.
I'll just say one thing. I worked back with the county many years ago on down payment assistance with CMHA. And CMHA, I think, would benefit from having more partners working with them. You know, they have the voucher program in Section 8. And I think a lot of the community steers clear of Section 8 and they have struggles with the program. But I think more communities that can partner with them, the better chance they have of doing a better job. And I think the whole issue of the administration of that program, I mean, they didn't inspect any housing units for 2 years because of the pandemic. And we have struggles with them over in Shaker Square. But I just think that the more that we could partner with CMHA, the more we could get the wheels working a little bit better, have better contacts with them. It would be better for the community in general, and would send a message, just like he said, out that this can work and can be effective for the community at large. There are just so many stereotypes that land on Section 8, and it's true in Cleveland Heights, it's everywhere. So I think it's the extent that we can build relationships with them, positive relationships for the future, will be good for CMHA and for the community at large.
Yeah, it just seems like it's going to be a monumental task to get some of the cities that should consider passing source of income laws to actually get them to move on it. And I mean, you know, and I'm not going to say a city, but I'm referring to those cities on the outer ring. And some of the wealthier, more white communities and less diverse communities. Though I do think that there are opportunities for us to have these discussions with cities like Maple Heights that have not passed source of income protections, and Cleveland Heights, and Bedford Heights, and many of the other communities as well. But that does passing source of income in those communities, which are already diverse, you know, how does that impact access again of voucher recipients, ability to access the schools that they want to attend and the neighborhoods that they want to live in?
Let's see if there are any questions in the chat, Keith.
Chip, this is Mary.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the beginning part of this last presentation regarding the county and the city health department. I know we went on to talk about some of the ways that they're linked already, but I wanted to just bring up an issue that is important across the board. What we call in our neighborhood the strike force. Back when Sally came in at the city, and we came before the council, the neighborhood that I was working in, we talked about changes in the law. A lot of good things have happened in Cleveland. Our neighborhood attaches with the suburbs. So a lot of people that live around here live either in Shaker Heights or live in Cleveland. And one of the issues that we've been trying to deal with, you heard about from tenant Ron James earlier in this program. What we asked of the city of Cleveland is, could you please have a strike force of the departments which can help when tenants in a building have a health and safety issue. And I was excited to think that the county health department might also be able to help at places. We asked for a meeting with people from the health department in Cleveland, the safety forces, aging, and building and housing to the degree it relates to dealing with emergency conditions. But we wanted to make sure if someone is stuck in an elevator, that there is a way that not only that people can get their public officials to respond. We had a meeting last week that the city of Cleveland did come with representatives of various departments, and Dr. Margolius, who was the new health director in the city of Cleveland, participated in that, to talk about these departments getting together and figuring out a way that there could be a place where a tenant could call and say, I think my unit isn't safe. It's too cold to stay in here, and I don't want to put a space heater in. And we're hoping that the city of Cleveland will begin to do that. I think it might be very important for some of the other areas where they have apartment units where there are serious health and safety issues, that maybe their appropriate departments in their cities would have somebody that people could contact to get help right away when they need it. Thank you.
And there is a comment in the chat also about lead and addressing issues of lead in homes. And I don't know if Roger or Lita would like to talk a little bit about that and lead abatement.
Rita, I don't know if you could speak to the lead abatement question a little bit. I did want to respond real quickly to, is it Miss Boyle? Regarding like the strike force that you just spoke to. I put my contact info down in the chat. I'd love to kind of talk more about that. Because I think, also I feel like particularly in the entering suburbs, Cleveland has scale, and I'm glad Director Margolius is at the table on that conversation. I think that's wonderful. By the way, both CDPH has new leadership, and Director Margolius and our County Board of Health, we have new leadership, Dr. Rod Harris. So I think there's kind of new energy and perspectives around a lot of these issues. But my point is, like, at the entering suburbs, there's an issue last year in the city of East Cleveland where a large scale apartment complex lost heat. And it was immediate crisis, and having kind of a strategy or like a strike force, I think would certainly be relevant there, particularly I think in entering suburbs that maybe don't have the scale to necessarily, be able to offer solutions there. So I'd love to maybe talk more about that. So I don't know, you can send me an email. this board, I'd love to talk more.
I just wanted to chime in on the lead. Of course, that is a huge issue here at City of Cleveland with our aging housing stock. You're probably aware that both previous administration as well as current administration and city council have put forth lots of support toward lead abatement through our ARPA dollars that we've been given. And actually the Healthy Homes initiative, which is it's similar to what Ms. Boyle was talking about around a strike force. It really took, it's a model that we use, but it took all the factions in sort of city government that deal with lead abatement and brought them together for the first time so that they were working collaboratively, which wasn't happening before. So thinking about our lead program here at the health department is centered in the health department. That's where, you know, homes are inspected for lead. If there's violations found, then the home needs to be abated. They do that. And then it goes to building and housing. And then if the homeowner doesn't comply, then it goes to housing court. And previous to the Healthy Homes Interdepartmental Initiative, those were things that were all happening separate from each other in silos. And so the homeowner or the tenants were having a really difficult time navigating that process. And so that's something that we've brought together. And now there's even more focus on it. And Mayor Bibb's administration created a position for a lead czar. That's a cabinet level position in his office so that it's even closer. And we're now working on getting the lead hazard homes that were backed up on our list mitigated and getting those cleared up so that folks can safely move back into them. And then moving forward, having very clear processes and resources for tenants, whether it's for getting their homes tested or learning how to detect lead in their homes or to keep lead dust down, that you know, piece of prevention, but also making sure that we are acting through the health department if we're finding children with elevated lead levels through testing and making sure that we're getting those things addressed from the healthcare point of view. And then also working very closely with our housing court and actually using that model of making sure that each touch point that we have in City of Cleveland on any specific issue like lead is handled in a very collaborative way so that when someone has a complaint or needs help or needs a resource, it just doesn't go out into the ether and gets lost. We're really working on tightening those things up, same way that we're doing with our what we consider environmental or nuisance reports on homes and properties, making sure that those things don't fall through the cracks any longer.
Great, thanks, Lita. And Chris, thank you. Chris from Fair Housing Center has confirmed that Cleveland Heights has passed source of income. So I apologize for Cleveland Heights for saying that they had it.
Former employee there, guy.
A long time ago. Are there any other questions or comments regarding source of income and public health disparities? Well, seeing none, I want to thank Naima and Roger and Lita for leading us through this discussion today, and thank you all for attending. I'll turn it back to Chip.
Okay, hey, we made it through. Amazing. When we started this out, we had a meltdown with our technology of Zoom. It's the first time we've had this conference, and we've had a meltdown with Zoom, but we managed to get through it. I want to thank Naisha, who is our VISTA, Volunteer in Service to America, the equivalent of the American Peace Corps, started back in the 30s, and she is serving at a poverty wage. She's actually our first VISTA who is not 22 years old. And we're happy that she's here with us and working with us. I also want to say one thing I've noticed, we always worry about press coverage. In my mailbox recently, I've been getting a new newspaper, I guess it's called Signal, and they have some serious money behind them. They're going to be covering some of the urban issues that we're interested in. And of course, there's land and then there's freshwater. So I think maybe the landscape of coverage at Cleveland will be improved in the coming months, coming years, hopefully, with better coverage of difficult issues that we've all faced. I want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank all of our participants, all of our panelists, and most of all, those people who serve on our conference planning committee. They have just done a terrific job. And we appreciate all their work and making this conference a great success year after year. And with all that, I think we can close it out and wish everybody a happy weekend and a happy holidays coming up. Thank you, Chip Bromley.